Do you see how you're pivoting from one topic to the next every single time you get like?
I don't see it as different topics.
Okay,
They're,
okay.
like,
Let's like try to stay on one thing instead of hopping when you realize that you're like talking about, because it started with like, I was curious, who's the third example of somebody that
Libya?
we annexed Libya? Holy shit! I got a U.S. passport. Can I go fly there right now? What are you talking about? When I asked you, is it justified? Is it justified? Is it justified? There were no chemical weapon attacks in Crimea. There was no genociding happening in Crimea. What is Russia's justification to annex that peninsula?
That it's historically been a part of Russia.
And that's enough reason to invade and steal something? Can Mexico invade the United States and steal property from, or any of the number of countries in Europe?
I hope so.
Okay, so everybody in Europe can just invade everybody else in Europe and take everything because it used to belong to other people at some point in time?
Sure, whatever. I don't care about Europe. I watched you and talking to Haas and Nick Fuentes. I don't usually watch that much of that sort of content, but I felt like it would be interesting to talk to you because it feels to me like you were talking to people who you probably have too much of a how do I put this? Like a brand relationship with, you know, like your communities are sort of like at war with each other.
I don't really care that much about that. I mean, they are, but sure.
I mean, I think it plays more into like how much people are willing to like be faithful auditors of each other, right? Like
for other people, it might be. I understand what you're saying, yeah. I have a hard time taking Haas seriously.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing or anything, but
yeah, I know what you're coming from.
I mean, I'm friends with Haas. Haas is one of my friends. Like, I know how he's like. Like, he has a pretty hot temper sometimes.
Well, it's not his temper. I consider him to be genuinely a stupid person. Like, that's the issue. But I understand your brother.
Haas is definitely not a stupid person. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with him. Haas is very well read. Like, in a lot of difficult literature, I would say, just like having read a lot of the same things myself. Okay. So I have a lot of respect for Haas. I'm not gonna lie, like I've spent a long time talking to him. It's hard to like translate that sort of stuff to the sort of medium of Twitch, I think. Like Twitch isn't really a great medium for like, say, talking about you know, the history of Western philosophy or something like that. Like these like large sort of problems or large fields of inquiry, right? Like that's like usually, you know, you want to have like a group of people who are like reading the same sorts of things, more devoted to like having a deep discussion about stuff like that. More like a college course, right? Is like where you'd have like a better environment, ideally, for talking about such things. I don't know if it's like if it's like evident to you just through like your interactions with him on Twitch or whatever, but Haas is not a dumb person. Like I don't think you're a dumb person either. I don't even think Nick is a dumb person, but I think Nick is probably dumber. Just on like a basic level.
Okay, I don't think Nick is dumb at all. I disagree with him on things. Haas, I mean, regardless, obviously I know you're friends with Haas. We're not here to discuss Haas's intelligence. Yeah. What did you want to chat about?
I'm just more interested in like what do you think is like the situation right now? Like, how do you view the world moment that we're in? Like, do you think we're like in a good place right now, or like, do you see things like getting better from here or like getting worse? Or we could limit this to just like America specifically.
I think in some ways we've gotten way, way, way better. But in other ways, I think we're kind of flying apart at the seams and we don't really understand why.
What ways have the things gotten better?
I mean, in very obvious senses, things like medical advances, things like the general state of peace and security around the world, things like the overall general health of people, especially in third world countries. I guess you can point to obesity and stuff. Obvious technological stuff.
Saying like globally.
Yeah.
So you're just more talking about like the global state of like technology and like the advancement of these sorts of technological improvements and, you know, access to more advanced infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera.
The stuff like
that's more true on like a global level.
Yeah, probably. Things that like Western people would point to and go like, oh, look, we're doing good because I can tell because of this thing, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm not really interested in like Western. Like I don't really care about like Western people. I think that's kind of a bullshit category, frankly. But I was saying more specifically like I'm in America, like America particularly. Do you say that things have gotten better here, let's say, in the last 40 years, or worse?
I mean, with respect to what? It depends, right? In terms of, like, race relations and, like, sexism and stuff, yeah, I think we've gotten way better. In terms of access to education, way better. Yeah.
Like, you could say the quality of life or whatever, however you want to put it. Like, I would say, like, maybe the amount of, the quality of life of people, I think, is primarily the thing, right? Because actually 40 years ago, like on average, people had more like disposable income, you know, and they owed a lot less. We had like a lot less debt, like consumer debt and like for like medical
quality
debt,
of life
debt,
gets like really difficult to like measure at that point though, right? Like 40 years ago, people might have had less debt and more disposable income, but like not everybody had a cell phone or access to the internet, right? Because those weren't things that existed 40 years ago.
Yeah, but they also didn't know that they didn't have a cell phone. So how could that be like impacting their quality of life if it's like a good that they can only imagine?
Sure.
You know?
I mean, 300 years ago, people didn't know that there were cures for cancer. So how can they, right? I mean, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that it's really difficult to quantify. Like,
legitimate.
Yeah, it's difficult to quantify. Like, what is it?
I think that's. No. But I do think that like quality of life has a lot more to do with like comparison within like your immediate like phenomenological reality, like, you know, like the immediate generations around you, like the things that's like how you're like you compare your quality of life to like amongst your peers and amongst people that like you see or like you've known of, you know what I mean? You're not really comparing it in like this like absolute like larger sense, because you can't really compare your quality of life right now to someone like 500 years ago, because it's like a totally different world. Like, well, the world works totally differently.
You absolutely can, right? But I mean, like, I'm saying that it's a challenging thing
how
to
would
do.
You do that?
Well, by saying that 500 years ago, like fucking 30% of women died during childbirth or whatever, and that doesn't happen anymore. Like, that's one way I could compare.
But they expected that to happen.
Okay,
yeah,
but that, well, I mean, if that's what we're
like,
gonna say, then in that case, every single quality of life is just neutral because it's always compared to itself, right? Like,
well, so then what we would do is we would compare like the current American quality of life, or like the trajectory of the American quality of life of the last 40 years, to say other geopolitical hegemonies over the last 40 years and their trajectories. We could compare that way, right? Because now we're just comparing like with like people in the same world historical moment.
I mean, I don't know why you think proximity in time is more important than proximity in like geography, or vice versa. Like, could I just point to the fact that these people live in different worlds, like people 100 years ago lived in different worlds? Like, that seems strange to do.
Well, I think there's only one world, right? So like we all live in like this world right now. We're all alive at the same time,
but we don't all,
in the same space.
Not really,
because we're all on the
right?
same planet. I'm connected to you right now.
Yeah, but like, are you more connected to an American 30 years ago or to somebody living in Sudan today? Right? I think that like, I think that the time and geography are both pretty important.
I would say personally, I have a lot more I found in common with like a lot of foreigners who I've made friends with through the internet and various other things, who are like sort of see things on a global perspective more similarly to me.
Oh God, this conversation is gonna be super boring.
About things like I find it very difficult personally to talk to Americans.
Yeah, so
even though I'm
backing up, who do you share more in common with? Like in terms of just like quality of life, things that you do your day-to-day basis, like somebody living in a country like the United States today or 30 years ago, or somebody living in like a sub-Saharan impoverished African country, right? Like, I don't think the fact that we all share.
What do you mean by like a sub-Saharan? Where do you mean specifically? Like, I don't know. I'm like, Africa's like pretty diverse in regards to.
Sure, I used Sudan as a country before, right?
Like,
do you think that you share more in common?
Sudan?
Yeah, with somebody that was like in Sudan today, or in one of the like 6 ongoing genocided areas today, or somebody that like is from America like 30 years ago, right? I think the geography is pretty important. I don't think it's. I think.
But say on a class level, like what I'm doing to like survive in the world, I probably have more in common with someone in a similar like class position as I would be or whatever 30 years ago in a Western, as you would say, or American country like zone, sure. But in other ways, the person in the Sudan also has more in common with, like, we both probably have iPhones.
I don't know if that is true. I don't know across the ports of African countries. I don't know how many people have access to technology. But I'm just saying that like I don't think that it's necessary.
iPhones are pretty proliferated. Like it's been pretty. We've hit like pretty much like we've hit like pretty like almost everyone in the world, if they want to have like a smartphone, like has one. There's been like
I'm almost 100% positive that's not true. I don't think that's the case.
Really?
I think there's a lot of places in Africa and poor places that don't even have access to the internet.
No, they don't have access to the internet, but they'll have these things too. Like because they're used by like larger, they're like handed out kind of by a lot of like American, like what do you think the USAID's doing over there? Like, you know, there's so many programs of like giving people this technology out there. It's a big part of like our like geopolitical strategy right now. You have like Elon Musk trying to like, you know, put up Starlink or whatever, so we can tie like the entire African continent to like our internet, right? Because Like these things are already proliferating. Like that's what I'm saying. I'm saying I think you'd be surprised how much people have iPhones all over the world, you know, or just like phones in general. Those have proliferated really fast.
Okay. Where do you want to go with this, or what's the?
Oh, I was still so basically like my contention. I think where we probably disagree the most, right, is that I see America on like a trajectory towards like a very negative trajectory over like the last 40 years, and I see that getting worse. And I don't think that things in America specifically are getting better or have been getting better for a while. I think things have been getting continually worse
with
for a long
respect
time.
to what?
The well-being, like the quality of life, like the way people imagine their futures to be, like just pretty much on almost any imaginable metric.
Well, so like
of like
the reason why I'm pushing here is because like
people,
not on any right, because like medically we've made improvements, technologically made improvements. So like with respect to what in more particular things you think have been.
We actually have like the life expectancy has actually dropped, right, in America over this time period.
Sure, but dropped why?
For a myriad reasons, right?
Well,
like,
I think it's because of
reasons.
suicide and opiate like overdoses. It's not like our medical technology has gotten worse, right?
Well, partially because like people don't want to go to the doctor and things like this because obviously our healthcare system is like a complete racket and like totally atrocious, like a crime against humanity.
I don't think that's what people attribute the lowering life expectancy to. It's because of the amount. I think it was because of suicides, and I think it's because of opiate overdoses is why it fell for the first time.
Well, suicide and opiate overdoses, right? That's an interesting thing. Like deaths of despair being like raising quite drastically over the same time period. That's interesting. Like, why do you think that is?
Probably because people are lonely, would be my guess. Lonely and purposeless.
Like, why are they lonely?
Either they are really bad at socializing, they don't have very many friends. We don't make good spaces in society today for people to find each other and socialize with each other. We become a little bit too atomized, especially with the internet.
Why is that? So we made the
probably.
internet,
I think technologically, I think is a big reason why a lot of this is happening now.
So like we made the internet, and the internet kind of destroyed our like social fabric, creating like a new social fabric, which is like the internet, right? Like now the internet is the social fabric.
Okay.
So like where'd the internet come from? Why do we have the internet?
Obama.
I imagine you have some big philosophical reason why, so why don't you just tell me?
No, it's not really philosophical. It's more of like a historical question, you know, like who developed the internet, like who funded it, like why was it put together, you know?
I mean, I think the U.S. military originally used it for messaging, and then I think that two people at some universities figured out that they could like ping each other back and forth, and then I think that it grew out of some like universities, like research projects, and people kind of messing around with it, and then eventually there was like business application for it, and then it slowly grew from there.
Yeah, pretty much. That's like a good short way of putting it. I mean, it kind of develops out of the same like sort of scientific like research. You could call this like war socialism or something under like FDR, like going into World War II. Like this is like where the CIA, the OSS, like all of these things are being developed at the same time. You have this like whole network of like imperial technocracy, right? Like this new imperial technocracy that we put together during World War II. And like that did the Manhattan Project and all these things. I mean, the Manhattan Project directly carries over into like the early days, like DARPA and things of building the internet, because the internet is designed ultimately to be like a continuity of governance manager for like a post-nuclear state. Like if we had this internet, then, you know, it would be much more difficult to destroy our like means of communication and things in a nuclear exchange. So like that's why we built the internet.
Okay.
So like basically what I'm saying, right, is like so in that same sort of way that like this was the thing that we created, like more so I would say even than the atomic bomb was our sort of advances in like propagandistic like technology, media technology. These sorts of things are what really won us World War II. And it's like the foundation of like our empire is like public relations and like advertising. Like you could call this psychological warfare. I mean, it's all really the same thing. And like, so this is the thing that we built. We like perfected this as an art, but it's also like sort of now destroyed like our social fabric. Like by doing this, by creating this America that we live in now, we destroyed the social fabric that like gave rise to it in the first place.
Okay.
Like that's my explanation for why things are like getting continually worse in America. It's because like we don't have a social fabric through like decades of like psychological warfare and manipulating of like socialist movements and things like that, like people fighting for like the quality of life, the working class, for like say a right to healthcare, a right to all of these sorts of things. These were like the number one enemy to the like this like technocratic imperial governance that was put in during World War I and World War II, through the Cold War. And these are the people who like truly run things in this country, and they're running us into the ground. Like they don't particularly
keep
care
hating your life then,
about
working
us,
class Andy,
except as like abstract like human resources in their game theoretical like war plans and things like this, right?
Abominable.
Gotcha. So what are we supposed to do? What's the next step?
What do you do in a situation like that? Like, right? Like you could say like, well, let's elect candidates, right?
Sure.
Let's
Well,
elect
I'm asking,
candidates
what do
and
you
have them
think?
stop
What
it.
do you think we should do?
What I think we should do, well, I don't really think there's like, we don't have that much agency right now in this historical moment. Like, I think that things are going to get a lot worse before there's even an opportunity to like alter the structures that we're like enslaved by here, right? Like, so I'm like a long-term optimist. I'm an optimist globally, but in regards to specifically America, I'm like a very, very pessimistic about like the next, say, 50 years of American history.
Okay.
You think I'm wrong? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, would you agree? Like, do you feel differently?
Yeah, I probably feel a little bit pessimistic, but for different reasons. But
like, what are you pessimistic about?
I mean, like, things like misinformation are, I think, really pervasive. I think that the way that we have kind of like taken to our new like ways of socializing without like giving people the tools to like live that way. So for instance, the way that our lives are so like heavily dependent on the internet and everything, but we don't know how to have like real friends anymore and stuff like that, or maintain like healthy relationships, stuff like that. I think these are the things that are really negative in today's society. And then I mean, there's
sure. I probably disagree with you on misinformation because like according to who? Yeah. According to who? You know, I'm like more of like like John Milton, the poet.
Okay.
No, I was just asking.
Oh no.
Do you like literature?
I guess not, according to Haas. So.
I don't know. I saw you had in DGG. You have like a book recommendations thing or like a little book club thing. I was looking at the conversations there because I don't really know much about DGG, but some people were posting some pretty good things. I have this guy shouts out Manhattan Silver has a picture. It's got like Fichte here. We got Kant, Rawls though. That's unfortunate. Hegel. That's some good stuff.
Okay.
I don't know. But what I was saying about like John Milton, right? Milton wrote this book called the Areopagitica. I would highly recommend it. But it's his like defense of like the value of having like, including misinformation allowed in like the public square, because like he believed that like in like the triumph of ideas, like through like the single combat of like dialectical engagement, like people like should be allowed to publish pretty much anything they want. And then we like have an argument about it, and like, the people who are right end up triumphing. The things that are true end up being like eternally true, and the things that are false end up like falling away. So I don't really think misinformation is like that much of a problem in that sense. Like I would say there's more misinformation from these like institutional powers than there is from like, I don't know, random Twitter accounts.
Okay. I mean, obviously I would disagree basically with every part of that, but.
Like, what would you disagree on? Like, or like what?
I think
don't know.
the
I feel
idea
like
that like
anything that's too absurd.
The idea that I think the idea that like people can have like a battle of ideas and the best ones always win out, I think betrays like a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. And the idea that like institutions
don't you think that, like,
are
we've
producing
had, like,
more
technological
misinformation
progress?
than
Like scientific progress, like isn't that how that works? Like in science and like every field, is that like we have this like open dialogue. People put out these pretty like insane
open dialogue
proposals.
doesn't happen in the scientific field among the public. It happens among technocrats, right? Or like the scientific.
Well, not necessarily.
Yes,
I mean, that's not
almost
true.
certainly necessarily. Yeah, of course.
No, there's been tons of scientific advances that don't come from like, I mean, if you're looking at like the age, like where the age of science, the early days of science, this is all like the technocrats, quote unquote, were just like whoever was contributing to scientific research. I mean, you
who
go
are
back
going
to
to be
alchemists
like the most educated people, probably some of the generally more wealthy ones in society. Yeah.
Well, not necessarily.
Almost
to get
certainly
educated
necessarily. Wait, hold on. If you're making
like,
advancements in chemistry, if you're making advancements in chemistry, if you're, like just having the capital necessary to buy the tools and equipment you need to do these tests, probably for the last 100 years, are almost certainly going to be coming from people that are well educated, are upper educated, and have the financial means to even have the luxury to pursue that research. You're not ignoring the money required to do it, just the fact you wouldn't have
for
to work.
100 years, sure.
Yeah.
The last 100 years, if you're talking specifically about like laboratory science, if we're talking about that.
Sure.
But so I feel like science is much larger than that, right?
Well,
like
even historically, if you look at advances in like mathematics and stuff, like a lot of this stuff is going to like were Plato and Aristotle people out working the fields, if you look at philosophy, or if you look at people like Newton or people that have made major contributions to these fields, like these are scholars that sit in rooms all day, like studying and reading and stuff. It's not like a worker in a field, invented calculus or discovered something, right? It's almost always going to be coming from like wealthy, like well-educated, I don't want to say elites, but kind of, yeah.
Well, you're more like the priest class, right? Like, I don't know if you would call because like a lot of these people also they're like a lot of this research is being done by priests, right? Who've taken like
I would
of, like,
easily
poverty.
call the priest class part of the elites. Yeah, of course, 100%. They tend to be very well educated. They tend to be
the priesthood.
They tend to be very well educated. They tend to have a lot of like financial means available to them. They carried a lot of power in society. Yeah, of course, I would call the priest class like relatively had high social status. How would they not be part of like the elite class?
Because there's different types of priests, right? Like you're talking, like you could say, like who has more like authority there, like a Waldensian priest, like a Cathar priest, like or a Catholic priest, like at the same time, like one of them has like the Roman Empire behind them and one of them doesn't, but like they're both priests.
Sure, but comparative within their own class structure, I'm pretty sure that the priest people, regardless of who they are, compared to the general population, are going to be more. I can't believe this is contentious to you. Wait, let's look at the other side of this.
No, I'm not.
Are you trying to say that like you think that a lot of like scientific breakthroughs just came from like normal random people? They just jotted down an idea and that was like.
No. That's not really what I mean. Although there are cases of like, people like discovering things like purely accidentally, and then having these like findings or whatever be found to be like, more useful by these more whatever, however you want to put it, learned or educated
people.
No,
I don't think that is the case. Unless you have like several like noteworthy examples. I think generally most research is funded, paid for, and done like by elites for elites because it's all like technological advancements that are like utilizable by them. Whether it's ways to make capital more efficient, whether it's scientific advancements that you need to be highly learned to make advancements for. I just totally, I don't know what I don't know if it's like ideologically loaded because you're coming from a very left background that you want to have the feeling that like the average person is like.
I wouldn't say I'm from like a very left background. I'm from like a very mixed background. Like I've been through, like I talk to pretty much everyone around the political spectrum. I read a lot of like what you might call leftist stuff. I read a lot of rightist stuff.
Sure, this particular claim is just really wild to me. It seems like one of the least contentious things in the world. Yeah, go ahead. What am I misunderstanding?
I think you're misunderstanding like the point that I was trying to make. Like my point was more or less that like you're saying that like this battle of ideas, like in the immediate moment, it might appear that actually like a falsehood or a lie has like won. That's like been more rhetorically persuasive, like in a particular moment. What I'm saying is that in the grand scheme of time, like in like a larger picture of time, that the truth tends to win out over falsehoods.
I don't know if that is the case. Yeah, I'm not. I don't know.
So then my question is, so then the question would be, right, like, do you think that truth has won out over falsehood over the last like 2,000 years? Are we closer to having truth than we were 2,000 years ago?
I mean, in some domains, yeah, but I mean, it's hard to know like how we measure that. Do we measure that in terms of like what do we know today about 2,000 years ago, or do we measure that based on like what do people today know? Like that's the difference, right? So like in some ways, like we know a lot more about ancient history and what happened today than the average person living in that time period might have known about some things going on around the world because they didn't have access to the tools. But then in another sense, half the people today in the United States believe the last election was stolen. So is that closer to the truth? Like, I don't know. Or half the people think
like in a total sense, in like a sort of potential sense.
It's such an empty, hollow claim to talk about truth in a total sense because I think that you are devoid of all like insight into making a good statement there when you start to say something like that. Like I don't even know how we would begin to measure
believe in truth. What is the truth?
Even that's a difficult one. I mean, like we can do. I guess. What do you mean when you say truth? Maybe that would be a good place to start.
I would say that it's things that are it's like the beautiful and the good. The true is the beautiful and the good. Like
okay, I don't know anything about
the true is the good. It's all the same. Like everything that's good is true, and all true things are good. Truth is truth. It reveals things as they actually are, like reality, giving like a depiction of reality as it is, as opposed to a false depiction of that. I mean, what else is truth, right?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define it. Truth could just be statements that logically follow axiomatic things. Truth could be some statement about like a fact, like a descriptive fact of the matter of a thing, like things that exist in reality based on how you measure things. I don't know. I guess it depends. Saying that truth is like the good and the beauty seems a little bit vacuous. I mean, like it's almost begging the question at that point, right? Like truth and beauty, or beauty itself, is incredibly subjective. So I mean, if you ask some people, we're closer to the truth today than we were before. You're really just asking them, like, are you happier with the world today? Would you rather go back to another point, right?
So when you say something like beauty is subjective, would you say that's true?
Yeah, of course.
Like, how do you know that's true?
Basically by tautology. Beauty tends to be our subjective enjoyment of a thing, and subjective enjoyment things can't really be absolute truths unless you want to say it's true to an individual. Like it's true that you can have a subjective experience about something, but I don't think that your subjective experience like imparts some objective reality onto the thing that you're observing.
But if like 100,000 people all subjectively experience the same thing as beautiful,
if 100,000 people all said that 1 + 1 was 3, no, it wouldn't mean anything. No. Or if 100,000 people...
I think those are the same types of judgments. Aren't you saying one's like, this is like 1 + 1 is 2 is not really the same thing as like, is this painting beautiful or something?
If you were to play 100,000 people from the year, 200 CE, some piece of music today, I don't even know if they would understand what's happening. They might totally not have an ear for it. And if you were to play a bunch of people today, music from like pre-music history stuff, they might hear it and think it's garbage as well. So no, I don't think that you can rely on a person to make an almost.
I mean, you can do that. I mean,
so I don't think you can make these absolute statements on like what is beauty. No, I don't think so.
Well, I mean, I think you can, considering I have. Like, what do you mean I can't? Like, should people be arrested if they do make these? No,
hold on. When I say hold on, let's think for a moment. When I say you can't make a statement, do you think that I'm saying that you literally can't utter a statement? Is that what you think I just meant?
I mean, I'm wondering what you mean by that. Yeah. Like, what do you
think I mean when I say you can't utter that statement?
I think you mean I shouldn't.
Yeah, it's like not true, right? You can't say that. I mean, you can. I mean, theoretically,
you can. You mean you shouldn't say that, right? Like, so you're saying that like one ought not to say such things, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. We'll say that. You shouldn't say that because it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I don't know how you could ever, like, if I play you a song, how can you tell me if it's objectively good or bad? How could you ever say that?
I've listened to enough music to know I have good taste. I'm good at listening to music.
So if I listen to a piece of music and you listen to a piece of music and I say, I think that this music is bad and you think it's good, how could we ever objectively resolve that dispute between us?
We would have a debate about it, right? And like we talk about our reasons for thinking it's good versus thinking it's bad, right? And
but what if one of the reasons is like, I like this instrument in the song, and you're like, well, I hate that instrument in the song. How do we resolve that?
Well, that would be one of many reasons, right? Like we wouldn't be able to resolve that actually.
Yeah, that's the point. What I'm saying is that at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of subjectivity from both of us in here that it's going to, by definition, have no resolution. So how can we ever make a statement about something being beautiful or not?
Because you want to express that if you feel that, right?
Yeah, but I don't express it as an absolute truth.
Beautiful?
Yeah, but I don't express it as an absolute truth. I express it as a subjective evaluation.
Do you think that anyone could have access to like an absolute truth? Like, do you mean like 1 + 1 = 2?
So mathematically axiomatic things, sure, it seems to be the case. If we believe in like faculties of reason and logic, you have to grant that like math follows, sure. But I think that's fundamentally different than like a subjective evaluation on art.
This is like, it's interesting. I don't know. You should read some German idealist stuff, right? Like this is what their questions are all about, right? Like this is like what the critique of pure reason is all about, right? Like are these sorts of questions like, can you make mathematical judgments like same way, or do they have like some sort of closer proximity to absolute truth? How do you know what if mathematics is just like a game we play?
I believe the term is mathematics has an unfortunately uncanny ability to map onto reality. So it seems like that's probably not the case. It's something like that.
So does language, right?
No. What do you mean? Not at all.
I don't think language has like an uncanny ability to map onto reality. Like, you know, when you describe like
language is
free, you kind of know what it is.
Well, no, language is just when we say things, we're hoping that you have a similar thing in your mind that I have. It's not a thing that maps onto reality. It's the way that we communicate with each other. It's fundamentally different than, I think, mathematical truths. Like, we see reality.
Isn't that true
and
of mathematical truths, though? Like,
no, my understanding is that, like, you can use
one is the same thing.
No, you can use mathematical things to, like, predict reality, right? I think, like, if you go, like, really heavy into physics, you can make mathematical algorithms that have nothing to do with things that we've observed before that end up being predictive of things that are true. I don't think language isn't predictive like that.
I think it is, though. Like, have you ever read like you read some like really insightful like piece of literature or whatever, and it's sort of like you can sort of see that these sort of social dynamics or like truths about like human relationships or whatever.
You've moved away from language now, and you're moving on to something fundamentally different, like some like grander concepts that are given to you by
language, like stories. Like do stories have predictive power? Like when I tell you a story, like does that have any predictive power for you?
No, it doesn't.
Really? None?
I don't think you can like I don't think you can make like a scientific prediction with just a story, right? Like these are different. It's a fundamentally different type of question.
Oh, okay, but like let's say like you meet someone and like you've heard and they're like telling you about this other person they met and they're saying that, hey, this person they came to my door, right? They came to my door and they said that they just needed to use my phone. So I let them in to use my phone and then they robbed me. And then then this guy shows up at your door and he's like, hey, like I really just need to use your phone. Do you think that story would have any predictive power to you in that circumstance?
Like in a way, but it's just fundamentally different than like a mathematical truth. It's just a fundamentally different thing. Because you're talking about like the difference between like inferencing versus like deductive truths. They're just fundamentally different things. Like a deductive truth means that the conclusions will always follow given a certain set of premises. Math is built around these types of axioms that given some set of arguments or statements, deductively there will be a conclusion that will always logically follow. It has to. By us being human beings, it will always follow. Things like a guy came to my door, tomorrow maybe another guy will show up and rob you. You don't know if that's 100% true. You're making inferences at that point. That's more inductive or even adductive reasoning. It's a fundamentally different type of truth. It's a different type of thing.
Okay, but is that still a truth? Like I don't know. Like you're like for practical purposes, what is the distinction between these types of truths or like these types of predictions?
I just told you the difference. The difference is that one is like deductively true, necessarily so. It like as in it logically follows. That logically follows part, it means that given a set of premises, like a conclusion will always follow. You don't have the same thing when we're just telling stories or communicating things language-wise. It's just a fundamental.
So there's like lack of certainty is what you mean. Like there's more uncertainty in language than there is in math.
It's okay. Okay, let's back up. What are we trying to accomplish with this conversation? Are you trying to say that like if I can tell a story with language that might predict a future event, then language can adequately describe something as being objectively true the same way that mathematics can, because mathematics also makes predictions?
Yeah, basically.
Without getting into like the weird. Okay. Give me a moment to think about this.
It's like a very strong claim I have to make in order to like, you know, make my worldview make sense, right?
So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to step into an area here, okay? I'm going to say that mathematics and the ability to understand mathematics, I think is something that is granted to us a priori. I think it's like it's an extension of a human's natural ability to reason. So for instance, if I show
language,
I'm not there yet. If I show somebody one banana and they understand math and I tell them there's going to be like 3 bananas, the person can understand like what is going to be 3 bananas without ever having to see 3 bananas. They have like built inside. Or if I show somebody like 2 and say 4 more are coming, like you have this a priori gift inside of you that allows you to understand deductively things that would give you the ability to grasp mathematics. That's one thing. So
sure.
being able to, so this is one thing. when it comes to language or what language is, in my mind, what language does is language gives us the illusion of being able to communicate thoughts and ideas to one another. That's what language tries to do. That's what we think it does. What language actually does is all of us have some set of experiences. We can call them qualia if you want, or just experiences. And we assign words to these experiences, and then we share the words with the experiences. And then when we communicate with each other, if I say a word, I'm hoping that I'm communicating an idea, but what I'm really doing is I'm saying a word, hoping that it brings up in you the same type of feeling that I get when I say the word. And then that's what language is. It's a way for me to say utterances that are proxies for feelings and experiences that we have in the world. Do you agree?
I don't agree with your vision of language.
Okay, what do you disagree with about
disagree
that?
with? So for instance, like you're saying that like it gives us the illusion of communication.
Yes.
Effectively, you're saying that like
correct.
Language is effectively like communication never like really occurs.
Correct.
Like,
we can't communicate. True. Yes.
So what are we doing right now?
We're just, hoping that we have the same set.
Each other's levers.
We have the same.
Just trying to pull each other's emotional levers and like manipulate each other into acting and responding the way we want them to.
Okay. Well, so right now, you and I are making a few assumptions with each other. One is we hope we have a shared language, which we do. We both speak English. And then two, we hope we have a shared vocabulary, that we've heard of the same words, and that we can have those same associations. So that's exactly what's happening. For instance, if I were to go up to somebody and I would say, hey, let's say it's a person that's been locked in a colorless room their entire life, and all they have is like a box to sleep on. And I were to try to say to that person, hey, I have a red fluffy pillow. I can never communicate that idea.
I know these debates. Wait,
hold on.
It's okay.
You
don't have to give me the.
It's not a debate.
Analogies.
I'm just.
You're
disagreeing with something that I consider to be like incredibly like easy to understand.
But
I can't communicate equality to somebody. Yeah.
Let me say something. So right now we actually are communicating, even though we do share like the English language. We don't actually share the same vocabulary, because the way I would use words and the way you would use words, we have mean them like in totally different ways. And taking that into account on my end, I can still communicate with you through the process that like I'm engaging in right now.
But only because we have a shared basis by which to try to draw inferences about what those words might mean. We don't know 100% their inferences. So like earlier when you were talking about literature review, I think you were like, oh, they recommended Mills, that's gross. But oh, dialectics by Hegel or whatever, that's based. Made me think like, oh, okay, this guy's probably a little left-leaning. I don't know that 100%, but it was just like an inference that I drew, right? We can try to draw inferences about each other's language. I'm not trying to say you're leftist. I'm just saying that even if we misunderstand, or even if we don't think we should use the same words, we can draw inferences. But if I were to start speaking to you in Spanish, you would have no idea what I'm saying. Our ability to communicate is gone, right?
I would do okay, because there's a lot of similar roots, right? Like there's a lot of Spanish, like Latinate roots. Like our languages, those two languages are like deeply tied together.
No,
through like
hold on.
Latin.
If you don't speak Spanish and somebody starts speaking Spanish to you, you're not going to be able to have a conversation.
If you spoke Portuguese, you could.
I'm not talking about Portuguese and Spanish. I'm talking about Spanish and English.
No, but I'm saying this is like specific. Like this is a specific like subset though, right? Like, you know, like there are some mutually unintelligible English dialects, even though it's the same language.
No, not. You're missing the point completely. What I'm saying is that there has to be some shared understanding of the words that we're using, that we have both individually already mapped onto some concepts for us to have a conversation. I can't convey a new qualia, a new concept to you unless we have some shared foundation by which to work with.
So have we ever produced a new concept, or did we get all of our concepts at a certain point? We don't produce new concepts?
I think we have to have experiences with each other, and then we build off of those. And then when we communicate with each other, quote unquote communicate, we're just saying words hoping the other person has the same foundation for experiences. Yes.
Like we do have the same foundations for experiences. We're human beings, like in reality.
That doesn't mean we've always had the same experiences.
Well, we have most of the same experiences.
That absolutely might not be true. A woman might not be able to communicate what it's like to have a period or a baby. One person in some area might not be able to communicate.
She would to a woman.
What?
You would to a woman. I mean,
exactly,
like
because a woman has the
confused
experience already. That's the point. That's my point. Yes.
Yeah, but they could also communicate to men. It's just more difficult, right? It's more difficult to translate an experience, but it's not impossible.
If
like,
a man,
metaphor.
No, it literally is impossible. Yes, it literally, you can't do it.
No, you do it through metaphor. No, like you can't imagine. Like,
when you do it through metaphor,
you haven't experienced it.
Yeah, but what you're doing through metaphor or simile is you're trying to hope that you can map it on from another experience. So if I say I have a fluffy pillow, and you're like, I don't know what the fuck a fluffy pillow feels like, I can never understand. I'm like, oh, well, it's like a cat. Then what you're hoping in your head is, okay, well, hopefully he's touched a cat before, and then I can map that onto that experience. But you're not actually creating, you're not inventing a new experience in their head. You're just trying to map onto things that they already know.
But if I'm, so like, what if you read, like, when you read a novel, like a fantasy or a sci-fi novel, right? It's like taking place in a completely different, like in a new realm, and like there's alien creatures, blah, 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 whatever you want to put it. You can identify with these people, and like you can like relate or empathize with people going through like situations that you've never gone through. And it can you can feel ways about it. You've never watched like a war movie.
Hold on, wait. Okay, so first,
like watching Band of Brothers,
you use like
something?
fantasy. When we talk about like fantasy or science fiction, the things that are talked about in these books are almost always universal struggles. If you're reading young adult literature, it's almost always going to be like coming of age. If you're reading something more mature, it might
so we do actually have a basic ground, right? Like everyone does.
Yeah, there's going to be some
sort of basic.
Yeah, there's going to be some basic. Yeah, but
right?
Assuming you've already had these experiences, yeah, of course. But you have to have the experiences.
So even if you
already.
haven't had them yet.
No,
If
you haven't had them, you're not going to have the.
Sort of
no, you're not going to have the foundation
understand
for it.
Some things about.
No, you won't.
You don't think you can know anything until you've experienced it yourself.
Until you've had some level of experience. Yes. Wait. How can I ask how old you are?
28.
Okay, so I'm 33. Okay, so like in high school, this was something that was repeated to me all the time, right? A lot of the men and a lot of the people going over to fight wars are just boys. They're young children. They're children. It's crazy. They're 18, 19. Well, when I was in high school, I was like 16, 17. That didn't mean anything to me. Like, okay, whatever. These kids are like in college, like I guess, okay, or they're like seniors or whatever. Now that I'm 33, and I think about like drafts and people being sent to war that are like 18 and 19, that statement hits way different, because 18 and 19 it's like, holy shit, it's like actually children. That's fucking wild to me. There are a lot of things that I understand now as an adult, and I know you're the same way. You can't, unless you're just going to be like a contrarian, right?
No,
there are some things that today you understand being older that if they were told to you when you were 20, you have no basis to understand these things. You can't.
Absolutely, because I was stupid. Because I was full of illusions.
But not because you were stupid, just because you lacked the experience. You just didn't have those experiences.
No, because I was stupid.
Well, but you were stupid because you didn't have the experiences. You're not delusional.
I was also completely delusional.
No.
You are. When you're a teenager, you're absolutely delusional.
No, you're not delusional. You're just lacking experience.
The world that you imagine. Well, yeah, but like because of that, you like don't have like a real relation to reality. Like you're like LARPing.
No,
all the
you're
time
not LARPing. You have a real
teenager.
relation to reality. Your relation is that of a teenager. That's why when you read young adult novels, all of them center on like the struggles of being a teenager and like finding your right. Like look at like Harry Potter or fucking the Bella vampire shit or whatever. It's all of it is about the teenager like finding out who they are and their identity and shit. Yeah, but that's not bad. It's not delusional. That's normal.
Well, it is, because it ultimately becomes a tragedy. Like that's like the tragedy of adulthood, right? Is that like your romantic, like your delusional understanding of the world, like your romantic understanding coming from like a sort of more protected childhood into like engaging with the real world, like ultimately that's going to hurt you in ways, right? And then like when you like are like actually like an adult, like you can sort of take like that type of suffering more seriously than you could when you were a teenager, right?
Sure. I mean, that you get a deeper appreciation for the good and the bad in the world as you become an adult, right?
Yeah, so I would agree with you on there that like you can't, like you have to like mature as like a person, right, before you can like really understand.
Well, no, hold on. I'm not gonna let you use these words. It's not mature as a person. If you were to lock a 17-year-old up in a room and bring them out when they're 27, they're not gonna be more mature. It's that you've collected a certain number of experiences as a person. This is why somebody who's 19 can be more mature than somebody who's 22. If the 19-year-old graduated high school when they were 17, 18, got a job and moved out, and the 23-year-old is still living in a dorm doing college. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm saying like the experience collection is important.
Yeah, I agree. You have to be like, this is like you could say this collecting of experiences is like education, right?
Sure, a type of education, yeah.
Like if like you're like for instance, like if you've only collected the same experience over and over again for like 20 years, like you probably haven't learned that much, right?
Sure, but I'm just saying, I'm like going back to the where we got off on this tangent from. I don't know what can you think of a single idea that you could communicate to me that I have no foundation already for? Like, could you communicate a truly novel concept that I have no shared understanding of to me?
Sure. Okay, I have a lot of these. My God.
Just think of like one.
Right. I'll go with this. Like John Dee, the Archmagus of Queen Elizabeth's court, right? During like the Elizabethan times, the Tudor era of England, the time of Shakespeare, etc. He was an alchemist and a magician and various other things, but he had a very interesting interpretation of the Trinity, and what he described as he described finding the quaternity within the Trinity, within like the Trinity of the Christian Godhead. What does that mean to you?
The Trinity is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
So how would you find the quaternity within the Trinity?
I don't know.
And so this is a new concept to you, right?
No, but it's built off of prior concepts that I understand.
Well, obviously, it's built off of prior concepts.
But if I didn't have those
built off of prior concepts.
Okay, so I guess to go back to like the debate argument, right? Could you describe the color red to somebody without them having seen the color red and make them understand what red is?
It's like a kind of irrelevant question when it comes to like whether or not we can build a new concept off of like the groundwork of existing concepts.
But I don't disagree. Of course you can build new concepts off the groundwork of other concepts. That's possible, but we need that foundational understanding first. If you don't have it, then you can't do it.
That foundational understanding is like language, right?
No,
like,
the foundational understanding is the experience. Language just tries to map onto that. If I get a tummy ache, if something hurts and I look up to somebody, I'm like, blarg, and I point to my stomach and then I have a pain, and later on they point to their stomach and they're like, oh, this hurts, and I'm like, blarg, and they're like, blarg. Now we have now we've created a word that we both understand maps onto something. If later on I get the same type of pain in my head and I point to my head and I go, hublarg, and they look at me and they're like, hublarg. Maybe they understand ha means head and blarg means pain. And now they're like, oh, I have head pain. And now we've created that concept.
I think that's like a very cutesy sort of like just so story for the creation of language, but that actually doesn't work. Like your model here that you provide, it doesn't work at all because you actually don't know if you're just both using the same word to describe like
exactly.
a disturbance around
I agree, but now you're stumbling into you're stumbling into a whole. You're stumbling into a whole.
You have to say like actually no. I feel more like nauseous. I feel sort of more like car sick.
I understand.
Seasick.
Yes.
And like you feel more like cramps. Like
yes,
you're more of
I
like
agree. I agree 100% with you. Welcome to the difficulty in all of modern medicine and with philosophy and neuroscience. Yes, it's very hard to know if the things that we say to one another are truly actually mapping onto the same thing. We don't know that. Some would argue it's impossible to know that.
So you have to have like a refinement of language in order to like better communicate.
No, it's
precise concept.
No, you can't communicate that. It's impossible. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Language is the best we've got, but nobody will tell you like, oh yes, you can perfectly communicate one experience with the other. You can't do that. You just have to hope that they have a similar understanding of it. But there's no way for you to know if it's the same. You can never know that.
Well, you're saying that you can't perfectly do it, but what you mean is that you can't do it with absolute certainty.
We can't do it with anything. Like, you don't even know if I'm having a conscious experience. I could be a philosophical zombie to you. You don't know that. You have no idea what my understanding is of the world.
I won't treat you. It might be tempting to treat you as a philosophical zombie, but I'm trying my best not to.
Wait, hold on. When I say philosophical zombie, do you understand what I mean when I say that?
I know what you mean. Yes, I know what you mean.
Okay, yeah, so I might not have a conscious experience at all, but there's no way for you to know that if all of my actions and everything are the same outwardly. There's no way for you to know that.
Well, how do I know that I have a conscious experience?
I don't know. I think therefore I am. It's the most foundational aspect of yourself, right? Is it a demon lying to you the entire time? Yeah. But I mean, like, even that is theoretically...
How does Descartes know that?
What?
Descartes has to disclose this to himself, right, through language.
Sure. And I think
he didn't invent his own language, so that's not really the foundational thing, right?
He doesn't have to disclose that to
language.
No, he doesn't have to disclose that to himself in a language. He's using language to communicate the concept to you, but he can intuitively understand it as well as he can.
Do you think in language? Do you disclose your own thoughts to yourself, like in language, or like how do you think?
I personally do, but some people don't. But I do. Yeah.
Okay, so like when you think, you actually are disclosing yourself to yourself through language, right?
For some things, yeah. But I mean, like, I tend to have like a dialogue in my head. But not everybody does.
Like, do you think you could do that without language? Like, what? You don't even know. Like, you can't even imagine what it'd be like to be a person but not utilize language, right? Like, it seems almost impossible.
Sure, but that doesn't mean that I'm getting the experiences from the language. I just can't imagine living and not being able to communicate with other humans.
Well, you can get. Can you imagine things like when you imagine? Can you imagine like someone else's experience?
To some extent. I mean, not perfectly. It depends on the experience we're talking about.
Like let's say like you have like someone who's like extremely good at expressing their own experiences. Like they're like a master with their language such that they can like really draw you like a realized imaginative vision.
Think about what
their
that means. When someone is really good at doing that, what does that usually mean? It usually means that they're either describing something so well, or they're using enough examples for an average person to follow along that they can map it onto their own experiences. That's usually what that means. But yeah, I mean, if somebody's
things that are like analogous to them.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, because you have to use analogy because you're looking for other experiences to map onto. Yes.
Yeah, because like metaphor is like analogy, metaphor, all of these things are language, because language is itself just entirely composed of metaphors and analogies.
Okay, well, yeah, but that was my original statement. You seem to say that we could communicate new concepts to each other, and I'm saying that you need a foundation. You have to have some shared experience originally. Okay, then I don't know what we even disagree on that. I think you've moved your position, but that's fine.
What I'm saying is that I think I really haven't. I'm saying that language, like you're saying that this is like this imperfect sort of like continually being constructed thing that has never absolute certainty.
Absolutely.
But, so you're kind of like disprivileging it as like a zone of like the disclosure of truth, right?
Can you disclose truth with language? Yeah, no, I don't. Not generally, no. I mean, it depends, I guess, on what you're talking about.
I don't think that you can disclose truth with language, really.
I mean, it depends on
math.
It depends on what you're talking about, and it depends on what kind of language you're talking about, or what you consider a language. Because I know that you want to say, like, well, what about math? What if I communicate math to each other? But like theoretically, like math is something that can be like communicated without language, or you can use a language to. But like the language isn't the math. The language is just mapping onto like mathematical concepts. It's a fundamentally different thing. You're not creating math with language.
Math is a language.
No. Math comes before language, right? Languages are
true.
Okay, well, we just fundamentally disagree on that. If the whole universe were devoid of humans, would one rock and one rock still have like two rocks?
If the whole world was divorced of humans, there would be no concept of any of these things, because they're human concepts. Like there'd be a totally meaningless question, because there'd be no meaning in the world either. There'd be nothing to observe the world and be conscious of it. It would just be nothing.
Okay.
If there's no humanity in the universe, then the universe is entirely void of meaning.
Exact time and place.
Sure. Okay. I'm familiar with this concept. Okay. Well, what do you want to talk about next?
I don't know. Do you like books? I'm actually a book guy. Like my podcast is called Read Books VLT. Logo Daedalus, by the way, to shout myself out here for anyone interested. But I mostly like books. Like, what books do you like? What's your favorite like novel?
I haven't read anything like recreationally for a long time. I just do. If I am reading stuff, it's usually like scientific studies and shit. I don't even remember the last thing that I read for fun. It's all like political shit, like some boring local politics.
Like what do you like?
In terms of fantasy, or in terms of like
anything.
Honestly, it depends on what's going on. If I have a big debate coming up, I might be really interested in like World War II shit or like Russian history or something. But if it's just like on my own, I'm probably just like either playing games or listening to music instead, or watching movies or something.
Keep hating your life then, working class Andy.
So do you ever like read like the canon, as they say, like, you know, do like a great books course or something? Like,
yeah, unfortunately, I did AP English 3 and 4, so we read a ton of like older, horribly boring shit. But yeah, so like the Odyssey and the Iliad and Beowulf and The Stranger by Camus
and like
Homer,
shit
like this. We must have read poetry by Homer. I think it was in one of our really big English books, but not like everything by him. I think he has like a ton of shit, right?
Thought it was boring.
Yeah, for sure. Homer,
really?
like Oedipus.
What translation did you read?
I don't know, but it's incredibly boring to me. The translations suck, and they just.
You read a bad translation then, because that shit rocks.
Honest to God, I don't think it has to do with a bad translation. I think it has to do with, I think that when you're 16, 17, you don't give a fuck about any of the shit or any of these fucking stories.
It's not true for me, personally. I loved reading my whole life. All I care about is like reading. Okay. Like I loved reading. I read Homer when I was in 5th grade, and I loved it.
Okay.
I don't know. I just love books. I feel like reading is like really important because it like stretches your historical imagination, especially to like read things that people have been writing like from like thousands of years ago, et cetera. Just sort of like try to absorb like a large picture of human development in time. It's like what I'm interested in, is trying to have like a really big picture view of things.
Okay.
I feel like you're not as interested in that, I guess.
Yeah, I think I am. I just don't typically get there by reading. It'll be through, or it won't be reading books usually. It just depends on what the subject is.
like what other means can you like say you wanted to like know how like a Roman thought in the year like 300 AD? Like,
could be through a documentary, it could be through some exploratory essay, it could be through a video, it could be through some sociological study, it could be, I don't know.
But like, I mean, like, how would you know like what they themselves, like when you could just read themselves in like their own words, like,
Keep
or like
hating
through
your
a
life,
translation,
then,
I
working class
suppose.
Andy.
Like ultimately like the closest you can get.
Maybe, not necessarily. Just depends on what we're
You're
talking
like
about.
getting it mediated. Like if you're not reading primary sources, then you're just like getting it mediated by so many levels.
Oftentimes we lack the understanding to contextualize primary sources. That's why if you're reading a lot of high-level stuff, usually you'll have like annotated versions, or stuff will be in the columns explaining like what a particular phrase meant or what they. So no, I don't even agree. That's not.
You can equip yourself.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, like at that point, it's not even like like the primary source wouldn't necessarily be the most important. Like a more important might be a secondary.
Definitely the most important.
Okay.
Definitely. The primary sources are like so important. Like I always highly recommend people read primary sources. You know, like I feel like it's like a huge tragedy that like people don't read like Abraham Lincoln's like writings and like his letters and like John Adams and like the founding fathers, because like we have all these amazing like primary sources. You can just like read people's debates. Like I love reading like the old flame wars, you know, of like all these people writing under pseudonyms during the Revolutionary War era. Like it's so much like our own present time, you know, like everyone writing under like pseudonyms and like flaming each other and trying to get people kicked off of newspapers and whatnot. It's literally the same thing going on today. Sure. So like that's why I think primary sources are like, you can't really get that sort of feeling of like how similar things are without, I mean,
like,
if
you want to go like an extreme, like some people would say that like reading translated text then won't even do this for you, right? This is why some people that study moral philosophy like won't do it unless they can read like German. So
it's definitely true to a degree. Like you can get more or less like better or worse like translations. Like ultimately, like there is something lost in translation, or there's things even added or whatever in translation. Like that's one of the biggest problems I think with like Western Marxists, is that like the specific translations of Marx's work into English have like totally botched some of like the vocabulary from like German idealist thought, and it's like led to like these complete like aberrations of thought that people think are like Marxist, and they're like not at all. They're like completely wrong. It's like most of the time when people are using the term like abolish and like quoting Marx, they're like they're like completely desecrating the source material.
Okay.
So there's like a lot of stuff like that for sure. Like you gotta like, if you want to like get into things, you have to like be really serious, you know, like it takes a lot of work to like really read. It's like a lifelong job.
Gotcha.
I don't know, that's what I'm interested in. I feel like you like you're more like, you play strategy games. Do you ever play Advance Wars by Web?
Nope.
Oh, do you ever play Advance Wars like at all?
No, I've never heard of it before.
Fire Emblem?
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Like Fire Emblem, but like with like modern army stuff, basically. Okay. It's like a Nintendo franchise from like a long time ago. It's just like a really basic like turn-based strategy game. But that's the only game I play. They have like an online service for it. It's pretty fun. You should check it out sometime. You like RTSs, like you like StarCraft, right? Like you probably dig it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
got a really deep competitive scene.
Gotcha. I'll consider it if I have time.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably better than Elden Ring, but I don't know. Elden Ring, I heard, is okay. I mean, like, it's interesting to me because, like, I feel like you engage a lot with, like, video games. Like, video games are kind of, like, they have, like, an element of the literary to them, like, sort of very subvertly, you know? Like Elden Ring is based off of so much of, like, Western fantasy's influence in Japan, you know?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the video game you're playing, sure.
Aren't you like fighting? Like I was watching you fighting bosses or something, and they describe someone as being from like the Empyrean.
Maybe.
I don't know. It's in the lore. That's like it's like Christian. That's like esoteric Christian theology and stuff. So like you're playing this game, which is like full of like, you know, like Renaissance, like esoteric Christian theology and things like this, and like you probably have no idea.
Probably not. I mean, when it comes to Japanese stuff, there's a ton of influence, especially from like World War II and stuff, and a lot of their art and media and so. But yeah, I imagine that's probably the case. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's one thing that I find really funny is like people really like video games, and it's like they play these games and you're not even equipped to like understand what like the artist who made the game is trying to say with it.
Sure, but I mean that's true of literally all media, right?
I don't know. I feel I'm like pretty good at reading.
Sure, but I mean,
It's
I'm
like
sure
what I
there's like a
think
ton
you
of
need to get
movies
better
that
at.
you've
I
watched
think that's, like,
that
what
you've
expand
probably
your
looked and
mind.
you don't like recognize that like some shots are being copied from other films or they're paying like.
I'm pretty good on that though. I like film a lot.
Okay, never mind.
Like film, or you like more of a film guy?
Yeah.
I know a lot, dude. I've devoted my life to this. This is what I do, you know? Like I take it as like a responsibility. Like I'm gonna be telling people things, especially things that like disagree with sort of like mainstream shit. Like I have a responsibility to be like really fucking good, like knowing a lot and like reading a lot, like being very devoted to like research.
Okay.
That's what I do. I don't know. Do you like movies more? Are you more of a film guy?
Yeah, I guess probably more than at least reading at
Like
least.
manga?
Not really. I don't like comics at all.
Okay. No, I feel like you're probably probably hitting like diminishing returns on like your. I don't know if do you feel like you're like cool with like how you understand the world right now? Like, do you want to learn more about the world, or do you feel like you pretty much get it?
I feel really good about my understanding of the world, and I'm trying to constantly expand my understanding of the world. So yeah, I'll probably continue to do so.
How do you go about like expanding your understanding of the world?
Super depends on the topic. I can't generalize that, right? Just recently, we had a whole bunch of conversations related to trans people. So I had a whole bunch of like trans fans like email me and their experiences like being trans. Like that might be.
Do you ever
one way
read
of
about the history of transgenderism?
Depends
like,
on if I'm arguing the history of
West?
trans experiences or not, or if I want to know what people's modern day like trans experiences are.
Did you ever hear about? Do you know that there was a transgender Roman emperor?
Nope.
Elagabalus.
Okay.
It didn't say Simon Says.
Yeah. So that was a big thing in Rome. It's actually pretty like trad. It's like one of the fun things I used to talk to the right wing guys about. I'd be like, this is all very trad. It's all just Roman stuff. To come back, like we're just like Roman pagans in America.
Okay.
We have the Colosseums, you know, like the Super Bowls, just like gladiators. You know, our celebrities are like basically like the gladiators. You're a gladiator, you know? You're like the esports gladiator, and now you like fight like, you know, people politically. You like went from like you're like what you're gonna like be the gladiator who gets into the Senate, you know? It's kind of Roman.
Okay.
Do you feel me on that? Do you feel me on America being Rome?
Maybe to some extent, but all right.
I mean, we are an empire.
Sure.
Do you agree that America is an empire?
Yeah, probably. I guess depends on how you define empire, but sure.
I mean, then you'd say it's not a republic, right? So it's not a democracy. It's like an empire.
Well, I mean, it's obviously a democracy, but
You think so?
yeah, of course.
Why?
Because we vote on our elected leaders.
That's all it means.
Yep, that's what a democracy is. Yeah, that's
That's all it is.
pretty big
It
part
means
of
you
it.
vote on your elected leaders, really?
Yep.
It's not how it worked in Athens.
Okay.
It's not how it worked in like the Italian Republic, the Venetian Republic, or you know, trading
The public
republics
didn't
in
vote on
general.
anything in there, but
Carthage.
they still call them democracies.
They didn't vote on the leaders. No,
What did they vote on?
they voted on issues.
Okay, so then they voted on things, right? We have a representative democracy. We can't vote on every single issue, so
But
we vote
the
on
people
leaders.
who voted were citizens. Citizens voted, and they voted on issues
Didn't say
because they would
Simon
like
Says.
organize, like the Senate, just the families, like like the heads of the families of the city, right? That's it. So they didn't elect their leaders. Their leaders, well, I guess you could say they chose like amongst their like families or their clans, like the person that was going to represent their household in the Senate, right? But like they didn't elect their representative. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
like,
Democracy can work in a ton of different ways, right? But typically, as long as there's like some
Sure.
representation from the public and either the leaders or the
I
policies.
think Russia has a democracy.
I don't think so. No.
They vote.
I don't know. Actually, no. Actually, I think I might have to be agnostic on that. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go.
Don't know
check.
if they vote.
I don't know if their votes matter.
Oh, your votes have to matter for it to be a democracy.
Yeah, I mean that's
Okay.
kind of the point of voting.
I feel like
right?
your vote matters.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I don't feel like mine matters. I don't vote.
Well,
Like
that's
most
probably why your
Americans.
vote doesn't matter then.
Most Americans don't vote because most Americans understand that our votes don't matter.
I think most Americans don't vote because they're apathetic of the process. Your votes obviously matter because
Why
our
are they
leaders
apathetic? They're apathetic
for a
because
variety of
it
reasons.
doesn't matter.
But it absolutely does matter. How do we choose our leaders?
doesn't.
It's based on who gets the most votes.
Don't.
Yeah.
Don't choose our leaders.
Really?
Simple. Yeah.
Did the establishment choose Trump?
In a way, yeah, especially in 2020.
Okay.
And they wanted him over Hillary, like the GOP. Faced a a large enough segment. Enough of the donors did. You could look at like Trump's donors in 2016. Most of them weren't his donors in 2020. There's like
Didn't
a big
Hillary
shift
Clinton
in, like,
have an overwhelmingly larger amount of donors than Trump did from large monetary sources?
Yeah, but Trump
so that
like,
statement is like totally contrary
donors
to
from
your
like the
point.
Mercers. No. He got a ton of money from the Mercers in 2016, but they didn't give him money in 2020.
Okay, I don't know what that's supposed to prove.
I'm just saying, like, at a certain point, like, you know, the establishment did approve of having Trump, right? They didn't do a Bernie to him, you know. I guess he couldn't. He was like more anti-fragile, but like
Nobody
obviously
had to
like
do a Bernie to him because
won.
Bernie couldn't have won. Bernie lost horribly in his own party.
But why?
Twice. Because he's not that popular.
Why isn't he popular?
Because his policies aren't that popular with the American people.
What policy is unpopular?
Medicare for all was not as popular as he thought it was. The fixation on education, the kind of like fixation on like the socialist aesthetic is not that popular. Yeah, I don't know. Basically any number of...
That because like consumer research and like PR firms and stuff did polls on like interest groups, and they found that these things didn't poll as well. That's like how you're going to say this is like true.
Yeah.
Is because like
based on the widespread opinion of like American people.
Tell us that?
I'm sorry, did you talk to every single American so you know that that's not true, or?
No, I don't feel the need to like I just make statements that I don't care about like trying to buttress like a sociological point with like polls and things like that. I just
so how do you understand sociological issues?
Through like science, like in the larger sense.
How do you think social sciences?
My ability to.
How do you think social
I
sciences?
don't believe in the social sciences.
Okay, how do you use
I believe
science?
in hermeneutics.
What does that mean?
Hermeneutics. It's the science of like reading. It's like how to interpret. It's like the science of interpretation.
What are you reading to figure out what most people in the United States think about a certain policy?
I read themselves, like, you know, I read like a lot of different people from like all over the place.
So you've read the opinions of all the Americans. Like, what your statement doesn't mean anything.
I've read
it's
a lot of
nonsense,
opinions.
Right? That doesn't matter.
From a lot of different people.
At some point, you're going to read so many of them that you might as well just be doing polling, like because you're talking about like getting statements from like a ton of people.
I don't think that's true because polling only gets people who are attracted to like doing polling, right? Or like, you know, who are going to like sign up for a sociological study to be polled or whatever.
And reading is only going to find people that feel like writing things down. I mean, like your selection bias either way.
True. I'm not claiming this to be a scientific process. I'm saying
you literally just said you like to use science to figure these. I mean in
the high sense of science, not in the delimited sense of like.
So like in an scientific way
research.
then. So in things that have nothing to do with science, but you like to use the word because it makes you feel better about the process, or because whatever you're describing is not scientific at all.
I'm using the word as Leibniz. Do you know Leibniz?
Nope.
I'm using science the way Leibniz would use the term science. I think you're more of a Newtonian. You're saying that that's science, but like, you know, hermeneutics is not science.
Okay, that's fine. I just got confused because you said
that's fine.
Science, but okay.
I know. See, like we run into confusion sometimes because we use words, but we mean different things by them, right? Mm-hmm. But we can still communicate our concepts. We can also understand like the disjunctions and like possibly the history of the disjunctions of these definitions, right?
Sure.
So there's like a whole genealogy to like the synonyms and like what words mean. Like there's a history to a word's meaning. It's like beyond our own opinions of it, right?
Okay.
Hey.
Anything else?
I don't know. I mean, do you want to talk to me about anything? I don't know. I'm just like picking your mind. I feel like you're interesting to me because you're like a very like you have all of the correct liberal opinions. Like it's like you might as well have gone to like an Ivy League university and gotten trained in all of this shit to like have the correct opinions like as a liberal because like you did it yourself. You know, it's like amazing to me. Like you have the exact same arguments as like an adjunct TA at the philosophy department of Harvard.
Okay.
Like, just saying.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I like.
You're like a utilitarian.
I like to be the mainstream safest opinions. You know, that's me. What am I gonna do?
It's not mainstream. I'm saying you've adopted like very high prestige opinions, even though that's not your like class background. Like you're like I know we have the same fucking background. Really, I know your background. Like you're like a working class. You're like from the working class. You're not from like sort of like bourgeois sphere. You've like ascended into it,
okay.
Right? But like that's not where you're from.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know how to engage with that, but okay.
No, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just saying, like, am I wrong?
No, I understand. I'm just I don't. Yeah, I guess I don't think of my opinions that way. Like, do I match up enough with like the Ivy League elite ruling class opinion structure or whatever? I don't know. That's not what I think about. But
I mean, you kind of do, because like that's like where all of your, like, when you point to like authorities, right? Like you're pointing towards this like nexus of like elite, like professional academia. You like really like the like authority of like the educated, right?
I like to trust like authoritative. I like to trust like empirically validated processes. I think is important. And then if people want to have more qualitative discussions, I think that's fun too, as long as we understand the limitations of those discussions. So when I'm trying to figure out what people believe in the United States,
do you think that there's limitations?
Yeah, there's limitations to everything. Yes.
Okay. Like, is there limits to like the empirical data, like the study of empiricism? Does empiricism have limits?
Sure, everything has limits. Depends on what we're talking about, right? Like we can't empirically validate art as good or bad, for instance. That would be one limitation.
Yeah, you can't empirically validate someone's politics as good or bad, right?
Correct.
Cool. Yeah. So then it comes down to like, really, we're discussing like what story, like what world do we live in? Like, do we?
Well, but we can like empirically validate like how many people support like a
world?
given policy, right? That might be an important question to ask.
I don't really think that matters that much, frankly. My view of the world, like what people like are trained to think about something, doesn't even mean that they're necessarily trained to like say what they really think. But like a lot of the times, people are just sort of like repeating like received opinion.
Sure.
They haven't really like investigated the matter for themselves, or
that's probably the vast majority of people's opinions on the vast majority of things in society. Yeah, because most people don't really care that much.
I agree.
Sure.
I agree. I think that's by design. Like, you know, like we have a massive structure for the
I don't
molding
think that's
of the
by
minds.
design. I think that life today is really complicated, and I don't think we've ever been that informed in the history of all of mankind on every single issue. I don't think that's the case.
Well, I would say that like when you're talking about the Republic of like the early Americas, that was like the most literate, like engaged population in human history at the time.
I don't know if that's true. Back then, weren't we originally?
It is true. You just got to read it. You got to read their debates, man. They were like, quote, they were very.
Wait, hold on. Back then, we didn't even have like normal citizens voting on the president, no? I thought that only people with like land could vote and shit, and literacy rates were not that great.
Depends on what you're talking about. No, I'm talking about Massachusetts.
I'm talking about the early United States of America, which is what you were talking about. Wasn't it true that back then that like
the Republic?
Okay, the 13 colonies, like.
Well, the 13 colonies weren't all one thing. They weren't governed as one thing. There were various like types of governance in the 13 colonies. Do you think the
literacy rate in Massachusetts, was it higher than like the literacy rate in the United States?
It's higher than anywhere in the world. Had laws for public literacy. They were called the Old Deluder Satan laws. It was like a public need to educate everyone on how to read so that they wouldn't be like ensnared by Satan, of course.
Do you think that the literacy rates in Massachusetts then were higher than the literacy rates in the United States now, or?
Yeah, I actually probably think they are. Like we have a very high like effective illiteracy rate. Like literacy rates have actually been declining.
And this is before black people were allowed to learn how to read, right?
Well, these are the people who would like later be teaching black people how to read, right? Like we're talking about the Puritans. Like they like black people, like that's one of the saddest things. No, black people had like a very strong literate culture. They really valued the written word and like learning how to read because they were disbarred from it. So like I think they still do. I mean, I think if you're just going to say there's like a literary culture in America, it's like mostly like, you know, comes out of like rap music and stuff like that, because these people are like poets and they like really value language and the power of language.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like what I care about, you know, like I care about like language. Like language to me is like humanity. Like that's our like defining feature, is like that we use and have created language.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I think that's like important stuff. But yeah, no, like I don't know how much you know about like the history of like earlier America, but like, you know, like it was the most literate society like of all time at a certain point. Because it was like a public need and people took everything like very seriously, because they were running their society as like simultaneously like a church and a state. Like it was all tied into one thing. So like the questions of like how do you run a church, like ecclesiastical policy and like, you know, Presbyterian policy, etc., was the same thing on like how you run elections and how you like determine the distribution of land and the distribution of resources within a society. Like, you know, that was like what the whole Massachusetts Bay Colony was about. It was like a communist experiment.
Okay. Tony in my chat wants me to ask you, Do you believe in T-Rexes?
I believe in T-Rexes.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Do I believe in a T-Rex? What does it mean to believe in it? I don't know what that means.
Real thing. He just wants to know some guy in my channel wants to know opinions about paleontology in general, I guess, and then he's asking about T-Rexes.
Oh, I mean, paleontology sus just because of like who was involved in like it was like the oil industry, and they were like trying to. There's a lot of sus stuff about like archaeology and the petroleum.
Wait, Eric, how did you know he was going to say that? Wait, what the fuck?
I don't know. I'm going to let it go on that because frankly, when I was a child, dinosaurs were like reptiles and now they're birds. So, you know.
Was it real dinosaur? Was it invented by the fact that oil barons financed paleontologists?
The evolutionary history.
Wait, how did you know this, Eric?
Creatures that have ever roamed the earth for all time. Like, I'm not that confident about our state of knowledge on that.
Okay, interesting. What did you think about you said initially you watched me talking to Haas. What did you think about my debate with Haas about Ukraine and Russia?
Oh, I mean, I'm definitely side way more with Haas. I mean, I studied Russian, like I can speak Russian. I have a lot of like Russian friends. I'm definitely more aware of like the history of Russia and the Soviet Union and that whole area. So, I mean, if you want to get into that, like we can talk about it, like how far back do you want to go? We're talking about Ukraine.
Why do you think that
Obama.
Do you think that Russia's current invasion of Ukraine is justified? Curious.
Yeah, I'm very much anti-NATO. And NATO's just the Fourth Reich, dude. Like literally, NATO.
Okay, wait. I just realized I don't care about this. Never mind.
Oh yeah, okay. You don't care, right? It's gonna be difficult to talk about.
I just
you don't care. You haven't read that much about it. You don't care.
Yes,
yeah, I got
right.
it.
Okay. Is there any other thing you want to go over, or?
I don't know. I really want to talk about how NATO's the Fourth Reich because apparently that's really controversial for you. And that was what Hitler wanted. Hitler wanted NATO.
I know.
That was his goal. His goal was the United States of Europe.
Yep.
That's what he wanted.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, listen.
Real. True.
It's been fun. We've kept it real.
All right. The handler's out. Get him off. Talk about the Fourth Reich of NATO. Get him off.
Obama.
It's all right. It's been good talking to you. I hope it's been amicable. I hope I'm not too annoying.
Sure. Okay.
I'm just interested. I feel like you need to read more. I don't know. Like there's not you can't have as much of like an in-depth conversation about like, you know, the development of philosophy and history through time and shit if you like don't read. Like it's just you're gonna be stuck talking about like the news of the week or whatever while you play Elden Ring.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because it feels like you've read a lot. You claim to, and you use words like you have, but you have a really difficult time engaging critically with conversation, which is always interesting to me. I don't meet many people like that. You could also be lying
or like
about
a Socratic inquirer.
It's not a Socratic inquirer. So like when we have the conversation related to language, you have a very hard time like actually critically engaging with what I'm saying. And if you've actually read as much literature on language as you've said, it seems like you should be really. I was just about to bring that name up because I knew you were going to. I don't either you haven't or you're a good reader but you don't understand the material, which is interesting to me.
You read the philosophical investigations?
I have a very bad engagement with literature because I'm just lazy, honestly.
Okay. Well, you should read the philosophical investigations.
But it's crazy that if you've read so much, I don't know how you lack the ability to critically engage with the ideas in a conversation. That's always scary to me. I don't know if you care, but I think you're probably used to like rambling.
I feel like I am critically engaging.
You haven't critically engaged with anything.
Pull
you're
your
kind of
audience.
Like,
you pull your audience whether or not they feel I've critically engaged in the conversation.
Sure. Do you feel like...
I don't know. I feel like I have. I don't really know what you mean. Maybe you mean critical engagement in like a specific type of like performance of rhetoric, but I don't know. I don't know what that means.
Should I explain it before I pull it? When I say critically engage, what I mean is there's multiple stages of reading something and assimilating it and then being able to deploy it in a conversation effectively. So it's one thing to read a book. It's another thing to read it and understand it. It's another thing to read it, understand it, and then be able to synthesize the concepts into something that you understand. And then it's a fourth thing to be able to take those concepts from the book and then argue with somebody else and apply the concepts that you've learned fluidly in the conversation. That's what I would consider to be like mastery of a material, basically. Usually when I see people that have... No, not at all.
I don't know.
Usually I feel like primitive material will be like
How'd you know,
saying...
though?
I'm trying to explain, but you won't let me explain, right? So like a primitive engagement is something that I'm very used to. which you've done a couple times. I've had a couple people do this. Usually they'll just say like, oh, I've read this, or oh, you should read that, or oh, I've read this. But that's not really good use of the material.
Aren't you talking about the experience? How you have to have, like,
hold on.
a common
Can I just
experience?
finish? Let me just finish, right? So that's one way, right? There's a couple people that I've read, not that I've read, that I've argued with that have really good engagement literature. So one person on this platform, if you want to go talk to her at some point, the Silly Serious, she's read a lot of social science related or like feminist writings and everything. When we're having a conversation, she might say something like, oh, like, I understand what you're saying here. It reminds me of this concept brought up by this writer, and she explains it in this way. And I think that's how that applies to this conversation. Like that would be like a critical engagement with a conversation. You're taking something you've read.
Okay, that would
you
be more
understand it.
useful for you is what you mean.
No, not useful. It shows that you understand the material and you understand the conversation. That's what the actual engagement with the critically engaging with the material and conversation would mean.
Okay, what would you like me to critically engage with more? I think I could do that.
Well, it sounds like you basically have like you've got like a view of the world that I don't want to say is conspiratorial, but you have like in your mind some view of the world, and then I guess you have some books that you've read that kind of like touch on that or like engage with that or intersect with that, but like you don't really have much interest in talking to or like really ironing out those differences or making them more concrete. Let me give a more definable example of this. Oftentimes when I speak to people like you want to talk in very grandiose, grand narrative terms without ever really getting into, I don't want to say getting into the weeds or something, but being a little bit more grounded to your examples. And instead that we hear like, oh, like what are society's problems today? Well, society's problems today are that the internet came out of like the World War II Manhattan Project and the US military global industrial empire process built this concept that atomized all of society in such a way that we can't truly relate to each other because the empire that America has and the advertising that we exported to the world eliminated our ability to understand each other. It's like some very grand. It's like
we created a virtual society.
Yeah, exactly. And these are like fun things to like masturbate over and talk about it, but you're not really saying.
What do you mean? This is reality.
You're not saying anything meaningful or anything insightful. Like nothing you've said in this conversation is like, oh wow, that's really interesting. It's all just kind of like built on this like very flowery, pointless, useless language. Yeah, no, nothing you said is interesting.
Flowery, pointless. That's
all
like
of this has been flowery, pointless.
That's the material history of the internet.
Okay.
It's like how it came to be.
Gotcha.
How is that not interesting? Like you're using it. Like it's informed everything about our lives.
Nothing about it's just nothing about this has been like informative or talks about how we're informed by it. It's all just kind of like self-masturbation basically. It's like
Obama.
I don't think I'm being masturbatory. I think that's
You're
not very
absolutely being
good faith of you.
I'm
trying to explain something to you. I'm trying to we could go into the weeds and things. I could explain to you how NATO like turned into the Fourth Reich. Like we could have a conversation about that. Like you don't want to talk about like the specifics of it.
Sure.
Like,
how is NATO how is NATO
it.
like the Fourth Reich? Go ahead and tell me. I'm curious.
Do you know about like Otto Skorzeny or like any of like the SS officers who were moved into like NATO powers like after World War II?
Nope.
Well, a lot of the like high command, the Nazi high command, like obviously like at the end of World War II, we're like, well, we want to go to war with the Soviet Union, right? Because we don't like these commies either. So who's good at fighting the communists? Well, the Nazis, obviously. So we just put them in charge of NATO.
And that was okay.
And yeah, it was. That's what I mean. That's like if you read like Churchill and like some of the other people, they were like, wow, we went to the wrong. Like we fought the wrong people.
Are these people that moved into NATO high command? Or are you just talking about like scientists that we drafted from Germany?
Talking about like Adolf Husinger, Adolf Heusinger, Adolf Husinger.
Also, why would we even say that Nazis are good at fighting the Russians? Didn't they technically lose?
Well, there's a lot of questions about that, right? I mean, if you read Gravity's Rainbow or, a lot of more interesting histories of World War II, there's a lot of like collaboration there. Like what's going on in Switzerland that whole time, weird stuff, man. World War II is a very complicated situation.
Okay, so wait, so you don't think that Germany lost to Russia, or you think that they fake lost, or that other people made them lose, or?
I think that the industrialists and like the ancien regime within Germany was opposed to Hitler, but were not necessarily opposed to fighting the Soviets, right? Like they were pro fighting the Soviets, but they didn't really quite like Hitler. So they collaborated with like the British intelligence services, right? Like that's how we had like all of the Nazi documents. Like we had all of their communications throughout all the war, because like the ancien regime and like the industrialists, the people with like the real power in Nazi Germany, like outside of the state, or like in like the sort of deep state of Nazi Germany, they collaborated across lines because they wanted to like join up like this sort of like European defense against communism. Like they were like Hitler never wanted to go to war with Britain, and in fact, like the royal family, like a lot of people in the royal family were really close with the Nazi commanders, right? Because like there's this whole world of like hereditary aristocracy, which is like tied together, and like they were using the Nazis basically to like defend themselves against like the communists.
Gotcha. Who you mentioned?
That's like what we're doing right now.
You mentioned like a Skorzeny guy.
Yeah, Otto Skorzeny or like Adolf Hosinger. There's like a bajillion people.
Somebody mentioned that this guy escaped imprisonment in Germany and died an outlaw in Argentina. No connection to NATO whatsoever. Is that true, or is that guy lying?
I'm saying there's a lot of sus NATO people. Like I'm saying all of the things
was that guy a NATO person at all, or was that just like a random name?
We're gonna go with Adolf Hosinger. I like talking about Skorzeny because he has a wild, wacky story. That's the only reason I brought up
was
that
he
name.
part of NATO?
But if we want to talk about someone specifically,
yeah.
if we want to talk about someone specifically, we're talking about NATO. It's Adolf, Heusinger. Okay, he was the chairman of the NATO Military Committee. Okay? There's like one of many people. I can bring up others. There's like Hans Speidel. He was the head of NATO forces in Central Europe. There's a bajillion. Millions, like tons and tons and tons. It's like just the tip of the fucking iceberg on this. But yeah, like the Nazis, the Nazi high command were very much involved in NATO, right? And like we were running like Operation Gladio to like fuck with the Italian communists and things like that in their elections, and do terrorist attacks. We do a bunch of shit. We arm neo-Nazis all over the place. We arm neo-Nazis all over Latin America. This is like what the CIA did after they did it like in World War II as like the OSS, or like even before that, it's the British Security Coordination. Like, this is how the British Empire ruled the fucking world, and it's how we rule the world. It's like why we're talking about winning information victories, right? Like, we're talking about the information warfare of the thing. It's because we have a massive public relations empire, so we can create a completely fictitious reality in which us arming neo-Nazis with billions of dollars is us defending European democracy. You know, it's literally the same thing as what happened during World War II.
Sorry, hold on. I'm just reading because I'm just curious. It's fact check. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no. You know, obviously they're not going to teach you this in school, dude. Like, right? Like, they want you to support NATO. So, like, why would they teach you about this? The news isn't going to talk to you about this. Like, the liberal news isn't going to be talking about this. Like, the people who are funded by, like, the military-industrial complex for the same donors, the same web of financiers, like, they're not going to be like, oh, yeah, by the way, let's talk about like the dark history of NATO. We're the good guys.
Okay, let me ask a question, okay? Because my World War II history sucks. The SS is not necessarily the German military, right? Like this was an extra like paramilitary organization, right?
It was like the German CIA.
Yes,
like the Nazi
okay,
CIA.
correct. Adolf Heusinger, was this guy part of the SS? It doesn't look like it. It looks like he looks like this guy was like serving in the German military for like 30 fucking years, like even way before Hitler, like. Under the German Empire, the Weimar Republic, and this guy even
tested. General Staff of the Wehrmacht.
This guy also testified, and he testified during the Nuremberg trials as well. Was this guy like a horrible, evil person, or?
Well, I mean, the question is not like what do you like? Do you care about like the personal morality of this person or whatever? Like what I'm saying is that like this power structure like merged.
Well, hold on. I'm just so one thing, like there's like the whole like mixing everything together to make like conspiracy sound stronger. So this guy wasn't part of like the SS at all, right?
He was the head of the Wehrmacht, but like I can find people who are involved with the SS who work for NATO. Like, is that what you want?
Well, you've named two names so far. When I've looked into both of them, your claims are totally bullshit on both. And then you brought up a fictional story to talk about it. So I'm just curious, like, because when you tell me the Gravity Rainbow, isn't that a piece of fiction?
It's a historical fiction, right? Like a lot of it is not fiction. It's like a fiction that's like contains a lot of like really like esoteric history, because at the time Thomas Pynchon, right, he worked for Boeing, I believe, and he had access to like the V2 papers from World War II.
Okay, different thing. So who else were there actual like Nazis, like horrible Nazi people that made it into NATO? Can you try a third name? I'm just curious because that's a new thing.
What do you mean like horrible? Like I'm just telling you,
like not just somebody that was like in the German military.
Like I don't know. What do you want someone who's like what? Like,
well, your original claim, because you tried to say that NATO was like the Fourth Reich. That's your thesis. Yeah, and one of the supporting statements you made was that we drafted a lot of horrible Nazis from like the SS and shit into NATO. And now I've looked up two of the names you've mentioned.
I'm not making
one
a moral
had
judgment.
nothing to do. No, hold on. Yes, whether you want to or not. We're not even at the moral part. We're just descriptively. I'm curious if the original NATO was staffed by a ton of Nazis. You've given me two names. The first guy had nothing to do with NATO. The second guy had nothing to do with the SS. So I'm just curious if this was actually the case, or if it's just like another random claim. What's like a third guy that was like drafted from the SS or from like the Nazi part of Germany? Like who was drafted to NATO from here? You said NATO was the Fourth Reich. That's what I'm curious. Is there any other connection?
Okay, so what was the Third Reich? What was the goal of Hitler, like of the Nazi party? What did they want to do?
I don't know. To expand some Aryan empire across all of West, is some moral tradcon bullshit or whatever. I don't know. I'm sure he had a lot of different
NATO?
goals. No, not like NATO. NATO is a member, is a bunch of independent countries that join, if they want to, with an organization that only is there to provide military assistance. We don't have any external controlling things. There's not like a NATO government that dictates
bases. Are there NATO bases on country soil?
But are there policies in these countries being controlled by the United States? No.
Yeah.
No. What do you mean?
They are.
Like what?
We spend a lot of money controlling the policy, like the Nord Stream.
I hear so much about this. I haven't read enough about this. So tell me why you think NATO controlled the Nord Stream 2 shit.
Because we want Europe to buy oil and natural gas from America, not from Russia, obviously.
So tell me how NATO did NATO like force countries to accept this, or did they vote on it and want to accept it?
Do you know the Rand Corporation? You ever heard of the Rand Corporation?
I've heard of them. Yeah, they get cited all the time.
Yeah, you should read. They have a paper. I'll look it up for you right now. They planned this whole thing out. Like this isn't like Crimean.
I always hear the Nord Stream 2 shit cited, and I haven't like read enough about it to have like strong opinions on it.
The energy dimensions of Russia's annexation of Crimea, or lessons from Russian operations in Crimea and eastern blah 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 blah. Russia does not seem to be after Ukraine's gas reserves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like we have like our whole war plan for this area is based around like oil pipelines and blocking the oil pipeline that the Russians were building in the Nord Stream, so we can build our oil pipeline that comes up through the Ukraine, which is why we're trying to hold on to it, so that we have like the crossroads of like where oil and natural gas is sold in that area, because that's how we maintain our global hegemony. Like that's how we maintain
the Nord Stream pipeline
hegemony.
is basically for the purpose of buying gas from Russia.
Yeah, that was the purpose, but now it's been halted.
What is it? But this is through Ukraine that isn't even a NATO country. What does this have to do with NATO forcing things on other countries?
How do you think we do that?
Do what?
Does America like do any sort of like influence campaigns like in Europe to like influence their domestic
Everybody's
policies
influencing everybody all the time for everything. Okay. So I'm sure we do, sure.
Okay, so do you think that like we would like say influence this or destabilize this region to make sure that
destabilizing a region is way different than influencing things. These are two fundamentally different claims. Everybody influences everybody, of course.
What's the difference? Well,
the difference is that one can be running advertisement campaigns, doing lobbying, doing presentations in front of government people. It could be public campaigns. There's a whole different thing versus like invading a country or like blowing shit up or terrorist activities or sanctions or terrorists
in an area.
Sure, arming terrorists in an area would be like a violent intervention. Sure.
Okay, so do we do that?
In Europe?
Yeah.
Where?
I mean, historically, we did this in Italy.
I'm not, right? Or historically, no. In the past, like 20 years.
Eastern Europe, like the Balkans. I mean, bro, what was Clinton doing?
What were the extremists? What were the terrorists that we were arming?
And which ones when, dude? Like, we do this all the fucking time.
Then name a couple.
Difficult. I'm talking about the Azov battalion.
Okay.
Right now.
We don't arm the Azov battalion. And the Azov battalion doesn't exist right now. No, we don't.
Yeah, we do. We just sent arms over to Ukraine. Do you think
we send arms to Ukraine? Ukraine has a military, and the Azov battalion is part of that military.
Trained their military, by the way.
What?
Trained their military.
I don't know. I'm sure they get probably help from all sorts of people. Probably some from the West, but... Why you wait? Hold on.
we
You're,
trained
no,
it.
do you see how you're pivoting from one topic to the next every single time you get like?
I
Do you?
don't see it as different topics.
Okay,
They're,
okay.
like,
Let's
interrelated.
let's like try to stay on one thing instead of hopping when you realize that you're like talking about, because it started with like, I was curious who's the third example of somebody that joined NATO from the SS. That was like, or founded NATO from the SS. But what if we want to focus specifically on the Azov battalion, right? Like any military assistance we send to any country in the world is probably going to help a Nazi somewhere, right? Because militaries just tend to have more far right people or nationalist people than any other military.
I don't think we should send military assistance.
That's great. I don't care. That wasn't what the conversation was about. The conversation was whether or not we're armed. You said that's. I don't care. That's not what we're talking about. You said the conversation was whether or not we armed the Azov battalion, right? So we send money to and arms to Ukraine, right? The Azov battalion and every other paramilitary battalion was integrated into the Ukrainian armed forces in 2014. So of course, any military assistance we send is going to end up with all the military of Ukraine. So how is that?
Keep sending them arms?
Yeah, of course. So they can defend themselves. Sure.
I disagree.
Okay, if you want to have a conversation on whether we should or shouldn't help other countries, that's fine. But you can't pretend that we're arming terrorist groups by sending money to Ukraine's military.
That's effectively what we're doing
Obama.
But no, that's not effectively what we're doing. That's one byproduct of like
It is.
Okay.
You're doing PR. You're doing a PR.
I'm not doing PR. Now you're having, if somebody who's so well read, I wouldn't expect to have such a one-dimensional view on like these types of interactions.
One-dimensional.
It's incredibly one-dimensional.
It's what our empire does.
It's
not.
All right.
Okay, what do you think the Russian perspective is? Like, do you have an equally nuanced view of like Russia's actions, or is it like what are their motivations? Why is Russia doing what it's doing?
Why is Russia invading Ukraine? I'm sure. Leading up to the most recent invasion, probably because the civil wars in the east were starting to die down. Turkey was sending Ukraine more and more of like a particular type of drone bombers that were like pushing the odds in Ukraine's favor. Russia had been continuing to move their military forces across the border, threatening Ukraine, such that if Ukraine didn't like cede these territories to the east, at some point, like Russia's going to have to invade or they lose all credibility on the world stage. So, I mean, it's just been something that's kind of like been building over the past year.
Does that make sense for them to do that in that situation?
Sure.
Okay, so they're not really doing anything like irrational, right?
No, but like somebody that murders somebody might not necessarily be irrational as well. That doesn't mean it's right. I mean, I don't think they should be allowed to do it, yeah.
Isn't there like a difference between like killing someone like in a way where it's like, like self-defense and then like, murdering someone? Isn't there like different things?
But if you're gonna say that Russia's not acting irrationally, then of course the West is not acting irrationally either, right?
Of course not. I don't think the West is acting irrationally. I think that the presentation of what they're doing is false.
Well, but that's the same of Russia and the West as well, right? Russia's presentation of like denazifying Ukraine is a joke, obviously, right?
I think Putin means that as kind of a sneaky, like he's like making like it's like a very funny. If you speak Russian, he's very funny.
No, it's like jokes, it's just propaganda.
Making fun of their
literally
making fun of their propaganda.
Okay,
that's what he's doing.
Okay,
ironizing the Ukrainian propaganda in a very clever way. Like he's making a joke.
Gotcha.
Like, that's one thing that doesn't translate that well. But
of course,
I can tell you, as a Russian speaker, he's making fun of Ukrainian propaganda when he says stuff like that. So, like when he's like, "Oh, you want to like decommunize? Like we'll show you real decommunization."
Who are they decommunizing? They're not invading Russia to decommunize anything.
But they said that. They said that. He said that. Okay, I'll explain to you the joke Putin made in his like speech in February. So, Lenin created the district known as the Ukraine as like an administrative district, right? It had never existed as an administrative state with like borders defined as the Ukraine ever until that moment. So and then this current hegemony in the Ukraine has been eliminating statues of Lenin under a policy they're calling decommunization. So Putin made the joke that if they want to really decommunize, that he will get rid of the borders that Lenin made, making it a Ukrainian like state, and taking it back into Russia. That's the joke. You see?
I don't think it's a joke. I think it's been presented enough times.
It was a joke.
Okay, gotcha. Can you speak some Russian for us? I'm curious. Wait, can you say some of that in Russian?
Я говорю по-русски немного. Я говорю как дураком, но изучал в университете.
Okay, gotcha. Just making sure.
A while. It's kind of rusty, but I did study it in college for years, and I read a lot, and I have Russian friends.
Okay. So I mean, if we agree that the West and the East are both acting rationally, then I guess then we don't disagree. Then that's fine. Sure. Although it seems like Russia's not being very rational because now they've like empowered all of NATO to hate the fuck out of them, and more people are considering joining NATO and their military operation.
Choice on that.
They absolutely had a choice. They just didn't have to invade Ukraine. They could have like shored up their own stuff in their own country and focused.
Russia wanted to. They wanted to join NATO back in the day.
Yeah, kind of. It'd been floated a bit in the early 90s and even under.
Why weren't they allowed? Why weren't they invited in with open arms?
Well, they were allowed, but I believe Putin said he didn't want to take the normal process. He wanted to skip the line, basically. I think he said he was insulted that they'd have to go through the normal steps to do it, so they didn't pursue it.
I mean, because he considered it basically as because Russia's like this huge power, right?
They're not a huge power. Russia's not. They think they are, but they're not anymore. It's not the cold. Who cares about historically? We're not talking about history anymore. We're talking about the now. We're not joining NATO historically. No.
We're living in history.
No, we don't. That's great if you were a superpower in the 50s and 60s or whatever, but that's not where we're at right now, right?
Okay, but they have a ton of natural resources. I'm saying it's a massive place, it's big power. It's a big land mass with a ton of resources and a ton of different peoples. Like, it's a big thing. So, like, I think it's like, when we created the UN, Russia got to cut the line. But then China became like
we're not talking about the UN right now, right?
But like the idea is if NATO is supposed to be this sort of similar, like transnational, like means of like mutual defense and like, policy discussions, et cetera, then why wouldn't they want to have Russia involved?
They could.
Because it's actually not.
They just have
to destroy Russia.
It's not designed to destroy Russia.
It is.
It's not. It's when is
NATO?
Why
did it exist?
Well, initially NATO existed as a counterpoint to the Soviet sphere of influence. However, post-collapse of the Soviet Union, now NATO just kind of exists for the general security apparatus of Europe.
Security against?
Anything. It's hard to attack a country when they're in NATO. What?
Such as, so who's threatening them? Who's threatening NATO?
Nobody threatens NATO. That's the whole point of NATO. You're not threatened when you're in NATO. That's the point.
So they have complete unipolar power over the entire world, NATO. NATO runs the world.
I mean, in a roundabout way, not really, because NATO typically only applies to like European countries generally, although that might be expanding. But yeah, you don't attack a NATO country. That's the point.
Because they're number one, imperial power number one. Everyone else, like, get fucked. Like, you're a loser. Join NATO or submit.
If you're 4 years old, I guess. But the reality is that when you're in NATO and you have a military alliance like that backing you up, you don't attack a NATO country because you'll always lose, right? And no other world power wants to go to war like that because because war sucks.
About Vietnam, like Afghanistan, didn't NATO fight Afghanistan? Like, aren't there NATO troops like in Afghanistan? What happened there?
Is Afghanistan in NATO? I might have missed it. I'm sorry. I don't
know.
So what are you asking? What are you saying?
I'm asking, like, what haven't these like forces been defeated? Like, when's the last war we won?
The Iraq War? I don't know. What do you mean?
We won? We win in Iraq? I don't know. I don't feel like we won. But...
We invaded and we deposed the leader. Yeah. I mean, what do you mean?
Okay. That's a W for you?
You're asking different questions. Do you want to just talk about like missions? Because in terms of missions, I mean, like theoretically, like even Libya was considered a win. The mission was accomplished. I mean, if you want to ask a broader question about like for the overall...
And we saw he died. I know.
Okay, so if you want to ask a broader question, that's fine. But you can't ask us like, well, did we win a war? Like, yeah, we did. I mean, we won in 2 weeks in Iraq. But it depends on what you're asking. I don't know what you're at. Well, I know what you're at. You're jumping from topic to topic, obviously, right? But yeah, fuck. You're running around in so many different topics.
Do you think? Mm-hmm. I think this is like a force for good in the world, like NATO?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, for sure, generally.
Really? Why?
Because I think that
you're just saying, like, they depose these leaders, they've created chaos, like in.
I don't
like
think
Libya,
generally they only create chaos. I think I generally support at least most of the NATO missions that I've read about. So I think I generally
depleted uranium in like Kosovo, things like that.
Do you think the intervention in Kosovo was a bad idea?
Yeah, I told you, I'm like a real American. I'm opposed to like all European.
That's not a real American. That's like a brain-dead populace that thinks that like we shouldn't do anything.
That's what the founding fathers wanted.
Okay, Kosovo I think is like one of the literally like most pro-American countries in the entire fucking world. Like, I think they were happy that we intervened, but I mean, okay. I don't know. I personally just don't think that we should be involved in governing like the world. I think that we should. That's great. That's fine.
Do a better job of.
I think that if you were like an Albanian being ethnically
here.
cleansed in Kosovo, I think you were probably pretty happy that NATO intervened there. But I mean,
I don't know if that's necessarily true.
well, the 90%
what's
approval
the
rate
other
that they
side?
have today of the United States, which is like higher than fucking almost any other country in the world, seems to disagree with you. But maybe you just don't care about those people because you're.
I mean, I guess if you were like a landlord in like Nicaragua, and like you get the right wing death squads are funded by America. I guess you really like America too.
Okay.
So who's to say? Who's to say who's good or bad? I don't know.
Okay. Well, I don't have such a weird view of the world, so I guess it's hard to agree on that. But yeah,
No,
so I mean, what do you think?
America's not a force for good in the
okay,
world.
hold on. This is
think it's a
kind of
force
what I'm
for
talking about, right?
bad.
This is like this conversation, the schizophrenic conversation of like bouncing around to random topics, not really saying anything of note, not usually like anything insightful, nothing of value. Like we've just like jumped from like, do you understand that this conversation has like gone over like 50 different topics, and we haven't like really talked about anything. We haven't said anything of value, either of us.
I'm more just trying to like figure out like what your like general vision is, because
No, you don't care about my general vision is. You don't have any idea of what my general vision is. You have like a huge grand narrative that you're trying to fit every part of the world into, and then you're interested, I guess, when part of my view, like
the hegemony. You support the prevailing hegemony. You think it's better than anything else that exists in the world.
I think that
you're
NATO as an
willing to
organization
overlook
that countries
a lot.
voluntarily join is superior to another country that invades countries, takes them over, and tries to steal their territory. I would say that, generally.
I just think it's like a very naive view of how things actually work. Like, frankly, I just think you're very naive.
I mean, you can
Like,
say
I don't think that's
naive,
how the
but like
world works.
everything you've talked about in this conversation demonstrates like an insane amount of naivety. Basically, U.S. bad is your entire
that's your
policy.
judgment.
And no, it's not. It's based on
I
what
don't
you
think
said.
the U.S. is bad. I don't think the U.S. is bad.
What do
I
you
don't
think would be
the
better
people
for
that are
Ukrainian
down.
people? You think them joining NATO or Russia taking the country over?
I think that it would be better for Russia to take it over. Yeah.
What about Ukraine?
I don't. Do you know what Ukraine means? Like in its own language.
What about
like
Ukraine?
Where the word comes from.
What about the country of Ukraine?
What do you know about Ukraine? Like Ukraine. What does that mean?
What do you think
What does it
about the
mean?
country of Ukraine? Here's what I
I
know
think
about Ukraine. In
it is a
1991,
creation
they declared themselves
Western
independent from the
policy.
Soviet Union, and their borders were recognized by the rest of the world, Russia included. That's what I know about Ukraine, including Crimea, by the way, which was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014. That's what I know about Ukraine. So the country of Ukraine,
Legally,
the country
according to-
of Ukraine. So who would be better for Ukraine? Them joining NATO or Russia going in and doing what they want with the country?
Russia.
Why?
Because they have the like same like sphere of influence, and like they have like similar like world. They speak like basically the same fucking language. Their histories are mutually tied together. They're like inseparable throughout.
Literally,
all of history.
none of these things are a good argument. Do you want to go through them one at a time?
They are. They are a good argument.
Okay, languages being
sure.
similar is not a reason for one country to invade you. That's not a good reason for them to invade you and take your shit. Number one. The second thing that you mentioned, it is an invasion.
I don't know what this is like.
You right now you don't think there's an invasion in Ukraine?
To be clear, I do not think the prevailing regime of international law is authoritative or has absolute value.
Wait, what are you
Like,
even
I
saying
don't
right now?
care
We're pivoting
what the
again. It's
claims
another pivot. This is another
the
pivot.
internet-
Okay.
Because what you're saying is that right now in the current international legal regime that this is recognized as a country.
It's like a
blah, blah, blah,
Markov
blah, blah.
chain
That
of like
doesn't matter
random
to
big
me.
statements that you make. Like I feel like if I had like your DMs another person, like with Haas, I see why you guys are friends now. You guys say so much, but you're not actually saying anything at all. It's just like Markov chaining together
Well,
a bunch
lot of
foreign
people
policy
think
terms.
that I say a lot.
No,
so that's
yeah,
your
I understand.
judgment.
I agree. There probably are people, because I know people like you that think they're saying a lot, and then people listen to you and they think you're saying, but you're not really saying anything at all of value. There's nothing you're saying.
I know people like you who think that when they can't understand something or see where something is going, that they determine
I
that there's nothing
understand
there.
everything you're saying. If you think I don't understand something,
I don't
feel free
think
to
you
ask.
do.
Okay, you just gave me some strange statement about how you don't value the judgment of international communities in relation to military interventions in other countries. Now, I understand why you might say that, because a lot of those international communities are headed by people like the United States or people like the UN who are going to be biased towards Western powers.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. I know what you're saying because it's copy-pasted, thoughtless dialogue from other leftist conversations. But the reality
No, it's not.
is
I'm not
hold on,
a
wait, let me
leftist.
finish. The reality is that Markov chain of ideas has nothing to do with the question that I asked you about whether or not Russia was invading Ukraine. You pivoted to another Markov chain
It
talking
does.
point that
The
you have.
definition of invasion is determined juridically by these
You don't think that we can
courts.
have some third-party definition of, is that country
No,
invading
there's
the
no
other
such
country?
thing as a fucking third party.
Okay,
What's a third party?
sure. Okay, gotcha. Let me boil this down then into other words, because I played video games. Do you think that Russia has men with guns and soldiers in tanks and some airplanes going past the borders of
Country
Ukraine
bullying small
in an aggressive
country.
manner to blow stuff up? Do you think that's happening right now? Yes.
Are we
Okay.
doing that in Libya? Did we do that in Libya? Was that an invasion or was that a police action? I
In
forget.
Libya,
Or was that determined?
in Libya, we didn't go there to seize territory from the country.
Okay, what did we go there for?
To get rid of Gaddafi and to stop the ethnic genociding that was going on there. It was a very limited scope of mission.
Okay.
It was so limited and it was so obvious that Gaddafi was so fucked up that I don't even think Russia or China voted against this military action. That's how fucked that place was. Was the aftermath of Libya good? No, I agree. But you want to compare Libya, where we went in with a specific mission goal, you want to compare that intervention to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where they're trying to steal territory?
Do you believe? I'm going to ask you just sincerely. Do you literally believe?
You're not. You're
that
pivoting
we
again.
took out
You're
Gaddafi?
pivoting again. Yeah.
No. I'm asking.
You're trying to pivot to another topic.
I'm
It's
not
like, it's so
pivoting,
obviously
because
not
you're talking-
comparable.
It's not. I'm not pivoting. Oh my God. Can I just say what I'm going to say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think we really went into Libya to stop a genocide? That's the reason why we went.
Yeah, there was literally a UN mandate related to like chemical weapons and shit. People were being like
Keep
tortured
hating
and
your life
gassed
then,
in that
working
country.
class
Yes.
Andy.
You think that's why we really went, is because of a moral concern from the UN? That's why that happened.
You tell me.
No, I'm just asking you, do you think that's how world historical decisions are made? It's like you have the UN doing just these objective reports on like human rights or whatever, and they go, hey, this world historical crime against humanity is happening. We need to assemble like the Avengers and go in and stop it. That's why that happened?
No, my broader understanding is that there is a general understanding of how the security situation ought to be set up in Europe, is a general understanding. Okay. And with that general understanding, when people who are either in Europe or very close to Europe are doing really fucking weird things, like using chemical weapons on their people, these are types of things that nobody likes. So if we see shit like that.
We ever use chemical weapons on our own people?
Past the year 1990? I don't know. Have we?
Yeah.
When?
Multiple times. I mean, what do you
Name
what do you
one
mean?
time.
Like,
Don't just
when
say
they-
multiple times. Give me an example.
When they send in riot troops and they gas the areas with gas, like, is that a chemical weapon attack or not?
I think
Just
through
policing?
military terms it is. But do you think that Gaddafi was using tear gas against his citizens?
I'm sure he was.
Okay. Fuck, this is really boring. Okay, are we good?
I don't know. Like, you're just saying things are boring when you want
It's
to like.
boring
tap
because
out.
you're
Like,
because
you
you
say
don't
we
because
go
I
into detail.
No,
but, like,
I am
then
trying
you
to go into
tap
detail.
out.
You're trying to tell me that tear gas is comparable to fucking nerve gas, bro. Like, what do you want me to say? Like,
Do you know how much shit America does to its own citizens? Like, it's insane. Like,
do you see
have
how you
black
pivoted
sites
now
where, like, people
to
get
another topic? Now we've gotten away from the Russian invasion into
I mean,
Ukraine. You tried to compare it to Libya. Now you want to talk about tear gas in the United States. Do you see pivot? Do you see how you can? Because you don't actually know about any of these things. You just have like these Markov
I do.
chains of like leftist propaganda that you've memorized about all these places,
You're
and you
just
like to recite them.
projecting, dude.
I'm not projecting because I'm willing
Just
to go in on
projecting.
any of these things. You're the one you're changing the topic,
Hey,
not me.
I am.
I haven't
didn't
changed
change
any
the
of the
topic. You
topics
said
here.
you got bored.
You are the ones
You
that
said
are.
you got bored.
I'm getting bored because you're changing topics so much. Like,
Okay, so we're just going to talk about this specific thing, right? We're talking about the UN. We're talking about third parties.
we were
international
talking about
societies.
Russia's
What are we
invasion
talking
into
about?
Ukraine. That's what we were talking
Yes,
about.
I am saying that Russia's invasion into Ukraine is, in my understanding, not like an invasion in the sense of like conquering territory.
It
for, like,
literally
spoils.
is there to conquer territory for spoils. What do you think Crimea was?
Crimea is where a lot of ethnic Russian speakers who were not a fan of the Ukrainian regime that NATO and like the CIA, amongst other people, helped establish in the late
Do you
Obama
think
era.
that?
Like,
Do you
kidding
think
me?
that? Hold on. Do you think that a group of people not being a fan of a government gives another country the right to step in and invade and annex that territory?
Isn't that what we do
When?
in Libya?
We annexed Libya? Holy shit! I got a U.S. passport. Can I go fucking fly there right now? What are you talking about? You don't understand what you're talking about.
We deposed them.
No, we
okay?
did not we did
deposed
not
their
threaten
government.
their territorial sovereignty such that we are annexing parts of Libya. That didn't happen.
Any parts of Libya declare themselves as an independent republic?
Sure, they might have. And you know what? Stuff related to Bosnia and shit happened afterwards with the collapse of Yugoslavia. But that's not what I'm talking about. We had a UN mandate to go to Libya. It's different than one country invading another country to seize territory. Why would you compare the annexation of Crimea to NATO intervention in Libya? It's not the same thing. We didn't go in to steal.
The UN said so?
I think if there's a collection of countries that are okay with things, I think that it gives you a slightly stronger mandate than one country acting unilaterally. It was literally a unanimous vote with the UN Security Council that China and Russia sit on. How are you going to compare this to Russia's annexation of Crimea? Also, again, notice how you've pivoted back to Libya. When I asked you, is it justified? Is it justified? Is it justified? There were no chemical weapon attacks in Crimea. There was no genociding happening in Crimea. What is Russia's justification to annex that peninsula?
That it's historically been a part of Russia.
And that's enough reason to invade and steal something? Can Mexico invade the United States and steal property from us? Or any of the number of countries in Europe?
I hope so.
Okay. So everybody in Europe can just invade everybody else in Europe and take everything because it used to belong to other people at some point in time?
Sure. Whatever. I don't care about Europe. I want to leave. I care about America.
Do you see the pivot? Holy shit! I don't care about
Europe. It's
not
really a pivot at all. No. I'm saying that my goal is to get all American military bases off of the face of the planet.
Yeah, I
right?
know. I'm sure.
My goal is to completely dissolve this empire. Right? So I don't want any of these things to exist. I want the Europeans to deal with them shit themselves. I don't want to be involved. I want our people to go over there. I don't want to be funding anything over there. I don't want to be sending arms to Europe. I don't want all of these because the reason is our funding of these things has negative effects on us at home. Our creation of this empire hurts us here.
Our creation of the empire helps us. It ensures the safety of trade all across the world. It gives a lot of people
capital.
What
helps capital?
Capital that exists in our country. You don't think that any of the benefits of any of the capital flow?
Banks.
Okay, all right. Okay, fuck, Jesus. Holy shit! It's like I see the Markov chains. Oh my god, it's so annoying. It is. It's just it's all these statements that are just I've heard a million times before, rearranged into random nonsensical fucking. This is what I mean when I say you lack critical engagement, right?
Random or nonsense.
You can't critically engage with anything I'm talking about. You're just hopping from one talking point. You're not. You don't.
I'm not.
What do you think? Hold on. What do you think critical engagement means?
Critical engagement means really listening to what the other person has to say and trying to understand what they're trying to say and to communicate something that you're trying to say and to have that communication happen. Critical engagement just means having a real conversation.
Then why do we keep hopping around so many different? How do we keep hopping around to so many disconnected topics?
Because it's become clear to me talking to you that we don't share a lot of the same fundamental experiences, you might say, I can't talk to you about something if you have no fucking clue what I'm saying, right? So I'm trying to find somewhere that we share enough of the same
where do we share enough
that we can have a meaningful conversation about
sure.
it.
Where do we
had
share
meaningful conversations earlier in this?
No, we haven't had any meaningful conversations yet. We haven't had a single meaningful conversation. Okay.
Not a single thing?
No. What part of a meaningful conversation can we have where you can explain to me why Crimea's annexation was a justifiable thing by Russia? Besides, there were a lot of people in that country or in the peninsula that speak Russian.
Well, because the people there were approving of it, they wanted it to happen, and the Russian people themselves were very much in favor of it. It was a very popular action. In fact, Putin's approval rating was going down because he wasn't doing enough to annex.
So if a people in a peninsula, another country, that gives that country the right to invade them. To invade Ukraine and take that property.
That is right. Where is this
moral justification?
I'm not talking about right.
That's what we're talking. Yes, it is. You're literally talking about justifications right now.
Who does Putin have to morally justify himself to?
Well, right now, around the entire world, we tend to agree that it's not good to invade countries and steal their territory. That's not a good thing. We don't like that. Do you think that should be an okay thing? Do you think maybe, you know what? Let's back up. Maybe you're right, actually. Do you think fundamentally the world would be a better place if countries could just invade people and take their land? Should we go back to that?
I think we're already in that. It just depends on what country
we're not in that. This hasn't happened in 30 years. It's fundamentally a brand new thing. This has not happened. This doesn't happen in the world in decades. Or not in the world, but in Europe for decades. That's why this is such a big deal. One country invading another to steal their land is shit that we don't see anymore.
Yeah, I don't agree with that framing of things. Like the way you're framing it is like leading to your conclusions. But I think that narrative, the story you're telling about this, I think isn't true.
What's not true about it?
I don't think because I think you have to have a larger context of this. What we have is NATO. We have a force that was designed to destroy the Soviet Union, which they did. And then we devastated the Russian economy in the 90s by sending in these like neoliberal shock troops to totally privatize and just pillage their economy. And it caused one of the largest decreases in like standard of living and like all of human history was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Completely terrible event that destroyed so much like human capital and wealth and caused like refugee crises and things like that.
We've hopped into another Markov chain, right? Yeah.
It's not a Markov chain. This is history. I'm saying the story of Russia at this time period is like a much longer story. Like we have to go all the way back to like the Russian Empire fighting with the British Empire over this exact same thing. Do you know much about the Crimean War? Like the Crimean Wars between the British and Russia, like the Great Game over like Eurasia? Like this is the foundations of geopolitics, like Mackinder's World Island. All of these things are about conflicts in this region. And this is what...
How long do you think he'll just like hop from topic to topic? Like what do you think? Where do you think we'll end up by the time he's done talking?
Justifiable to like just invade a sovereign country and steal their land. That's just the ideological framing that we're providing it from this side of the conflict. That doesn't have like a world historical truth to it. That's just this hegemony's perspective on events. And I'm opposed to this hegemony. So I don't agree with the fundamental story that it's telling about reality. See what I'm saying?
I have no fucking idea what you just said, but maybe it's because I don't read enough, I guess.
Yeah, do you want to critically engage with it, or do you want?
There's nothing to engage with. You're not making any profound statements. It's just like a bunch of like little.
It's not true. I just made a lot of points, and just because you have stated that I haven't doesn't mean that I haven't.
Okay.
You're just saying that like rhetorically, your denial that I've said anything meaningful makes it not meaningful. Like that's all you're saying. You're saying in your estimation, you didn't understand or find value in what I'm saying. That doesn't mean there's no value or no meaning to what I'm saying. Maybe you're not the one critically engaging with what I'm saying. Maybe you're not.
Every time I try to engage, I barely am catching my breath running from point to point with you as you like hop from one thing to another. So,
okay, I have a lot to say. It's a complicated thing. Do you have patience?
It's not that you have a lot to say, and it's not that it's complicated.
It's
that you just have a really bad time like critically engaging with the topics. So you have a lot of random things you want to say that mean nothing.
I think that's what you're saying. I think that's how you view it, but I don't think you're right about that.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying like maybe you could like try to critically engage with what I'm saying. Like if I'm saying something and you're like, wait, what do you mean by that? We could have a conversation about it. But what it seems more to me is that you're not that interested in learning anything about this or in engaging with a different perspective. You're pretty content with your own perspective. And you're mostly interested in just like fighting off what you see to be like attacks and like the validity of your perspective. Like, that's how I feel. I don't feel like you're trying to like learn or understand or have a real conversation. I feel like you're looking for like a moment or place which you can like shut me down or like in a way where it's like now the conversation's over. Like we haven't even like had critical engagement across like what I'm trying to say. I don't think you understand what I'm trying to say.
I don't.
Like I don't think if I ask you, okay, so if you could just sum up for me, what am I trying to say? It's usually the test, right? Like if you can tell me what I think in a way that I would agree to your wording of it, et cetera, or the general understanding, then we actually have communicated something.
Sure.
But I don't think you're capable
My
of doing
understanding
that,
of what you're saying is that in the most macro, broad sense of the world, okay, the entire statements that I'm making can basically be understood as kind of like this curtain that's been draped over everybody's eyes from, I could call it like the neoliberal establishment, I could call it a Western establishment, I can call it a US hegemonic establishment, but basically there's like this story that the US hegemony likes to tell the world, that the US are the good guys, that NATO's expanding to protect countries and provide security in Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, behind the scenes, you have these more contrived political powers that are backed by capital that are essentially trying to like export their influence and everything all across the world, especially across Europe, especially in contrast to communist or socialist movements, especially in contrast to like Russia. And that the entire goal provided for examples of things like the Nord Stream Pipe 2, or the idea that we are contrary to some of our values, like drafting people from Germany into NATO, even though we say NATO is supposed to be a mission for peace, that all of these things serve as giant blocks, giant pillars to understand that the reality is that all of this stuff that's being built around the world is just to serve the interests of a few people that are really high in these hegemonic positions in the West, that are really high these really high capital holders, that they don't really represent the interests of the average person. And part of the reason why I guess like the world is falling apart is because either people are slowly starting to realize that, or these people can only serve their interests for so long before everything falls apart for everybody else. That's kind of what it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, it's a basic Marxist hermeneutic.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. I just think it's all stupid. So now where do we go?
Okay, so why do you think that's stupid?
For a million reasons. One is because to have an analysis like this, a macro perspective on this, we have to get micro on every single little claim. Does capital really control the prevailing interests of the political class, or is it the citizen? That's an important thing that we have to have a discussion on. It's a really big discussion, and it's not even. It's nowhere near. No, I think that the public has a huge control over the elected class. And you run into this time and time again. I don't care what you're gonna say. Okay, you run into this time and time again because people will say things like "there's a ruling class, there's an elite, et cetera, et cetera." It's like, oh, really? Well, how do you point to the fact that people like Bernie Sanders got kind of popular? Oh, well, the ruling class kept him out, so he was controlled opposition. Oh, okay. What about people like Trump winning the election? That guy wasn't ruling class. Oh, well, actually, they ended up picking. There's always an excuse why that this conspiracy works most of the time, but it didn't work in that time, or why? And eventually, at the end of the day, we end up debating all of these really nebulous, weird, stupid things that don't really translate to anything real at all. We have to talk about like the Bilderbergs and the fucking demon gardens and the groves or whatever. I don't even know half the fucking shit because it's so boring to me. Okay, and we don't actually get to discuss anything that's happening in the real world. Instead, we elect for these like really exciting and really fun narratives that we think can explain all of the world's problems because they're way more fun and interesting to talk about than kind of the more boring on the ground realities of the world we live in.
I'm not opposed to talking about the micro level either, but I think that like they inform each other, right? Like if you have an accurate view at the macro level, then it helps you have a more accurate view on the micro level.
I disagree.
Too, right?
I think that the macro level, that abstraction necessarily needs to be derived from your individual understanding of what's going on. And in fact, I would say necessarily, because if you have a macro understanding first, you're only going to selectively pick the micro things that fit that narrative, and you're going to preclude any ability you have to actually have a greater understanding. I think it's definitionally true. Anybody that approaches something with a macro level understanding of what's going on without even knowing what's going on is always going to pick and choose, because the world is huge. What are we at, like 8-9 billion people? You can always find events, you can always find facts and figures, you can always find a study to support your prevailing macro theory if that's all you're looking for. So I think that approaching things with the macro theory first is horrible. You have to look at a whole bunch of different micro things, and then you can structure macro theory based on the things you've seen.
No, my macro theory here isn't something that I'm like arrived with a priori, etc. Like I've come to this view through like having gone through many other worldviews, right? And like challenging myself with like tons of different like perspectives and evidence, etc. So it's like really this view that I've come to, like that I'm trying to describe, it's not something that I came to like a priori or whatever. And I understand that you deal with like a lot of like Western leftoids and like people who are like kind of unserious about reading this stuff, but I'm asking you to like actually treat me as if I might know a little bit more than some like dullard leftoid or whatever who's just like mouthing off, as you say, like Markov chains and things like that, because that's not really my perspective. I'm not like, I don't agree with them on most of the things that they would say. I have read a lot of Marx, obviously. I've read a lot of things, but that's like been very influential to me, and so have a lot of other things, right? But I don't agree this idea that like you have to pick either doing things from like constructing on the micro level into the macro level, or from the macro level and then conforming the micro level to that. I think that there's like a dialectical engagement here. Like when I go and investigate things on the micro level, that will change my mind on things on like the macro level too, and vice versa, Like it's kind of a perpetual process of education. I'm not trying to pick one over the other.
Okay. All right. Well, listen.
I'm saying we can have a conversation at the macro level, or we can have a conversation at the micro level. But if what I've been trying to do is to move between those two, and I feel like that's what has been throwing you.
Gotcha.
Like you don't want to move between talking about the micro level and then back to the macro level and then back to the micro level, back and forth. But that's generally how I think.
Okay.
That makes sense. Does that make any sense?
Yep, I gotcha. Okay. Well, listen. It's been fun. I'm gonna play video games because that's my dialectic engagement with the world. Okay.
Okay. Well, let me know if you ever want to read books.
Okay, I'll think about it. Okay.
I can help you out.
Okay. Have fun, buddy.
All right. Peace out.